In 2022, gaming is the biggest it's ever been. Thousands of new games are released every year, and only a select few of those actually manage to capture people's attention. Even less of those receive critical acclaim. And a game has to do something special to really stand out amongst the crowd, and even then, given time, many games are forgotten, even those diamonds in the rough. But a game like Dark Souls is still held in high regard today. The game is now over a decade old, but people always come back to this one title that was released on the 22nd of September back in 2011. It won numerous Game of the Year awards back in the day, but it's since become known as one of the greatest video games of all time. It even won an award for being so in November of 2021. But what is it about this game that makes it so special? How did Hidetaka Miyazaki and his team of developers and designers over at FromSoftware manage to create such a masterpiece? Well, let's take a closer look at this legendary title and find out for ourselves. Dark Souls began development in 2009 as a sequel to Demon's Souls. However, FromSoftware did not want the game to be published by Sony this time, instead transferring the publication rights to Bandai Namco Entertainment. The intellectual property rights to Demon's Souls, however, were held by Sony, which meant that FromSoftware could not make the game a sequel. So instead, Dark Souls became a spiritual successor, originally known as Dark Race, but the title had to be changed for obvious reasons. Hidetaka Miyazaki had a very hands-on directorial approach when creating Dark Souls, often discussing his ideas with the designers and developers themselves instead of passing on his orders down the ladder. He would first give his team keywords, which were then brainstormed together, with some adjustments being made where necessary to incorporate everyone's ideas into the plan. The manga series Berserk played a huge part in Hidetaka Miyazaki's original vision though, and he combined that with other ideas from Greek and Japanese mythology, such as the idea that the world experiences a natural cycle, as well as ideas from philosophers such as Friedrich Nietzsche with his ideas concerning existentialism and meaninglessness. When designing Anor Londo, a very beautiful and distinct area in the game, the developers also took influence from the Milan Cathedral in Italy, as well as the Château de Chambord in France for its interior structures, such as the iconic staircases that overlap each other. Regarding the gameplay decisions such as its high difficulty, Miyazaki continued his approach that he took with Demon's Souls, trying to take gaming right back to basics with a purely gameplay based, challenging experience where control is rarely taken away from the player and they are always within the game world, and this couldn't be more true for a game like Dark Souls, where the player can literally go from one end of the game world to the other without ever experiencing a single loading screen because everything is connected together seamlessly. However, we will delve more into the game's level and world design later on. But now I think we should start talking about how the game starts, by creating your character. Just like in Demon's Souls, when you select a new game, you'll immediately be thrown into a character creation screen, where you can customize your character's appearance and also select a class. Each class affects your character's stats, armor, and the general path your character begins to go down by altering your vitality, attunement, endurance, strength, dexterity, resistance, intelligence, and faith. You can see a description of what all of these mean when you get into the game proper, but on this menu, you have no way of knowing what any of these stats actually affect. You can also pick your character's gift, which is an item they start with that can affect the game. Anyone that knows anything about Dark Souls knows that the only item you should ever pick is the Master Key, as it opens so many doors and completely changes the way you play the game, and the order in which you complete the areas in the game. The other items have nowhere near the same impact, and this is something they would address in later FromSoftware titles. The game opens with the player's character in a jail cell before Oscar throws a body down into your cell with a key on it which allows you to escape. Just like in Demon's Souls, the player then is placed at the beginning of a long hallway where they can get to grip with the game's mechanics. This level is yet again a great way of teaching the player the core combat and movement mechanics. You learn light attacks, heavy attacks, backstabbing, parrying, blocking, rolling, jumping attacks, and even the new plunging attack. Like in Demon's Souls, all of these concepts are told to the player through glowing orange messages written on the floor, which are by developers only here. But like in Demon's Souls, this makes the player trust those messages, which isn't really very good for later in the game when other players can leave messages on the floor, which may in fact be incorrect advice. As in Demon's Souls, the first enemy you encounter here will not attack you, giving you a perfect opportunity to test everything out and get to grips with the game's controls, whilst also noticing how actions affect your stamina, which is indicated at the top left. Now, I discussed how important stamina is in these games in my Demon's Souls video, however, I need to reiterate it here. The way that the Souls games handle stamina is vital to making their combat loop rewarding and engaging. Every action you perform in Dark Souls affects your stamina in some way. A basic attack consumes a certain amount of stamina. A heavy attack consumes more. Rolling also consumes some. Blocking a hit with a shield consumes some. Sprinting consumes some. So as you can see, pretty much any offensive action will consume stamina. Regenerating your stamina though is also affected in many ways, and this is very important to know and understand. When you're completely stationary, your stamina regenerates very fast, but if you're raising your shield, it regenerates a bit slower, and walking allows it to regenerate, but a bit slower than if you're stationary. The fact that having your shield raised makes your stamina regenerate slower is one of the most crucial things for a beginner to the Souls franchise to understand, because a common mistake is for players to keep their shield raised at all times because they feel safer and they feel more comfortable, but in actual fact that is hurting them because they are then having less stamina to use for their offensive actions because it's regenerating slower, which means they're in battle longer and are more likely to die as a result. Understanding and mastering the way the stamina works is probably the single most important thing you need to do when beginning to play Dark Souls. Now, Hollows are the main enemy type in the tutorial, and humanoid opponents will be all you face for about the first fifth of the game, and these enemies have the most predictable attacks, and all of them can be parried and backstabbed. From the Asylum all the way until the Depths, the player will be fighting variations on similar enemies, the main difference being the weapon of choice and armor. This eases the player into the combat systems of Dark Souls and allows the player to build up the necessary skills required to play this game over time before the game begins to throw curveballs. The Northern Undead Asylum is a fantastically designed tutorial, from the initial encounter with the Asylum Demon, which teaches the player to be mindful of their surroundings and look out for environmental cues, to the game introducing traps to the player with a rolling boulder, which then smashes through a wall, which also teaches the player about how the environment may change and secrets may sometimes be hidden in ways the player wouldn't necessarily expect. Then the game gives the player Estus flasks so they can heal, stronger weapons so they can deal more damage, and anything else they might need for their selected class. Eventually the game then throws the player back into the ring with the Asylum Demon with newly acquired knowledge and the skills required to beat this guy, as well as the game as a whole, which empowers the player and makes them feel ready for whatever the game throws their way. After beating the Asylum Demon and leaving the Northern Undead Asylum, the player arrives at Firelink Shrine, the main hub area of the game. This is the safe haven in the land of Lordran, a small area surrounding the warmth of a fire, kept alight by a firekeeper without a tongue hidden away underneath it. Characters will gather here as the player meets them on their journey, and many different areas also connect back to Firelink Shrine through shortcuts the player unlocks. Merchants gather here and other characters too, and if anywhere could really be called home in Lordran, this would be it. In front of you when you arrive is a character known as the Crestfallen Warrior, someone who we also saw in Demon's Souls, but the characters are only related in name and voice actor. He tells you what your goal is, if you haven't been paying attention to the cutscenes or if you didn't understand the game's vague story. I'll discuss this character more later, but it tells you that you need to ring 2 bells of awakening, one which is somewhere high and one which is somewhere low. This is all you're told, and it's the only clue you have as to what you need to do. This is how the story in these games is conveyed though, through character dialogue and the descriptions of items that you find in the world. There's no real direct narrative, and that's an intentional part of the game's design. It's there if you want it, but even then you need to piece it together yourself, and it's entirely up to interpretation, and that's what I like about this series. Another character at Firelink Shrine is Petrus of Thoroland. He's a member of the Way of White Covenant, and he teaches the player miracles if they picked a cleric class. His storyline we will discuss more later. In Firelink Shrine there are various items for you to collect, and you can also use the souls that you acquired, which are the currency of the game, to level up and increase your statistics. You always want to level up Vitality, which is your health, and Endurance, which is your stamina. The other statistics entirely depend upon your build. Strength you'll want to level up if you want to use slower weapons that deal more damage like great swords or clubs. Dexterity you want to level up if you're using faster weapons that deal fast damage with each hit, like daggers and katanas. Intelligence you want to level up if you're aiming to become a sorcerer. Faith is there for the clerics who want to use miracles, and Entombment is then beneficial for sorcerers, clerics as well as pyromancers, and it allows you to increase the amount of spells, miracles or pyromancies that you can have equipped at once. Resistance though is useless. Never level up resistance. From Firelink Shrine, the player can go 3 different ways. One path leads up towards a reservoir where you'll be greeted by a collection of hollow soldiers. This is the correct path, and we'll be progressing through this video as if you go down that path. But the other 2 paths can lead you to the catacombs, where you'll be confronted with very strong skeletons that can kill you instantly and infinitely respawn, and also New Londo Ruins, where there are very strong ghosts that can kill you instantly and you can't even damage them with your weapon. From there, though, you can access pretty much every other area of the game if you want to, but we'll be assuming that you took the correct path, where you're confronted with simple, hollow soldiers that you can take on pretty comfortably at your level. Before we go through to the Undead Burg though, I think we need to briefly discuss the difficulty of this game, because this game continues that high difficulty we saw in Demon's Souls, and this game is where that difficulty almost became the game's selling point. This game was marketed with the literal tagline, "Prepare to die." And as I mentioned in my Demon's Souls analysis, beating Dark Souls almost became a rite of passage for some gamers, and a challenge you would give people. If they couldn't beat Dark Souls, they just weren't a true gamer. Enemies hit incredibly hard in this game, and you are punished very heavily for your mistakes by losing souls you've acquired and progress you've made. Enemies respawn when you die or when you rest at a bonfire to get back your healing items. But this mechanic is how the game teaches you to get better, and it means that when the game bumps up the difficulty more and more, you have the ability to rise to that challenge. For many people, there's a moment when they play Dark Souls that the game's mechanics just click for them. The stamina management, the combat pacing, and the tactical nature of encounters begins to all make sense. You become comfortable with the controls, and then usually at that point, the game just isn't as hard as it was before, because you understand what the game is asking from you. And now, I don't find the Souls games hard as I once did, and many people had experiences similar to this. Before the game clicked with me though, I did actually quit the game. I put it down and vowed to never play it again. But I came back to it a few months later, tried again, and I was punished in a similar way. But there was a point when I was actually fighting the Taurus demon, so quite early on, that I changed up my playstyle, and because I kept dying, I started adapting to what the game wanted from me, and then it all just clicked. I understood I needed to take my time, dodge the enemy attacks, and wait for an opening. I began to manage my stamina better, and then I got through a lot of the game pretty comfortably. The Souls games are so much more than their high difficulty though, so I don't want to dwell on this too much. The games are elite in their storytelling, world building and level design, and they respect the players, and they don't feel the need to hold the player's hand and guide them along a set path like The Last of Us or these other kind of modern games. There's no easy difficulty because the developers want the player to rise to the challenge. They don't treat them like babies. They want them to become better because of what's in front of them. They want them to beat these obstacles, and that's one of the many things that makes this series special. Now then, we're going to begin to sort of go through the levels in a similar way to what I did in my Demon Souls video. So next we have the Undead Burg. The Undead Burg is that beginning, it's almost like an expansion of the tutorial. Here we get some very well placed enemies that are placed in different setups which encourage you to sort of be very aware and mindful of your surroundings. First of all, we have these two enemies in front of you which are relatively easy to take down, but then there's one throwing a firebomb. If you go to attack that one throwing the firebomb, there's another enemy on your left waiting to ambush you who will then attack you. This is then introducing that concept of always needing to watch your corners to make sure you don't get ambushed by enemy attacks. Progressing on up, we get ambushed by this red dragon, but he doesn't do anything, he just flies away. This is the trigger to encounter him later. If you go around and don't actually go this way, if you've played the game quite a lot, you can go around, not actually encounter the Hellkite Drake here, and then he will never spawn on the bridge later where he ambushes you, but that's more for an experienced player. Progressing through that area normally, we then get some more tricky setups. We've got a guy shooting a crossbow at us with some other enemies, and then going to the right you've got two very defensive enemies holding their shields up with spears behind them. These are very difficult for newcomers, but the game is trying to teach you to either kick or backstab here, and because they're playing so defensive, there's no real other way to defeat them. Going down here, you've got a merchant who sells you stuff and has a very good weapon, and this is also showing you different paths that will connect back on the main path, because if you follow this path around, you can then go back to the main path when it connects later on after you've got the crossbow. Progressing on forward, we've got a bonfire, and then going further forward, we've got another set of enemies. You have to cross a bridge with loads of enemies throwing firebombs at you to get there. You can't take out these guys now unless you've got sorcery, or I don't even think with sorcery you'd be able to get a lock on onto them. So basically you need to rush across this bridge. There is a little shortcut you can take, but you'll get ambushed by a black knight, so you don't really want to take that shortcut. There's more very simple scenarios where the game is teaching you, like having one guy throwing a firebomb or two other enemies are attacking you, a guy shooting a crossbow from on top of a tower that you can take down, and then some more defensive enemies down below. Down here you also get your first proper encounter with the Black Knight, unless you made that little jump I talked about earlier. The Black Knights are... they reward you very heavily with a lot of souls, but they're very, very difficult for newcomers. They're almost meant like, if you're good at the game, here's an extra challenge for you. Or the game's sort of showing you, really, that if you do take down these stronger enemies, you will get rewarded massively for doing these things and going down these optional paths. Progressing on forward, you got another trap where there's a rolling explosive barrel, and if you take down the guy up there, we go up to the top and we're confronted with the Taurus Demon. The Taurus Demon sort of reinforces that concept the Asylum Demon introduced of encouraging you to use plunging attacks, because there's a ladder behind you which you can climb up, and you can do plunging attacks from there which take down the Taurus Demon very easily. Plunging attacks is something the game introduces early on, but then after the Capra Demon, there's never really an opportunity to use a plunging attack again. It's quite strange really that they encourage you to use plunging attacks so much early on, but then they don't really use it later. It's quite strange really. The Taurus Demon is not really the best visual design, but he's a pretty decent challenge for newer players. He's very easy once you're experienced though, but he's a pretty decent first proper boss for the game. After this we move forward and encounter Solaire. And Solaire gives you the white soapstone, which allows you to engage in jolly cooperation with other people online. And then you get a shortcut back down to the earlier bonfire by the Taurus Demon if you go underneath a bridge. This bridge, though, also contains the Hellkite Drake, which I mentioned earlier. Here, if you had that little run-in with him earlier, when you go to cross the bridge, the dragon flames the entire bridge and burns you to a crisp instantly. This is one of the moments in the game that I don't really like. It did get me first time through. I managed to recover my souls though, but It's like the game wants you to die here for some reason, because even if you pay attention to the bridge, which has very clear black char marks on them similar to Demon Souls, even if you pay attention to that, there's no way you'd expect the dragon to come from behind you. But it's such an iconic moment now in the series that I can't even really be too mad. But anyway, you can go underneath the bridge to progress and fight some rats that deal poison damage, or if you wait a little bit by that bridge, by the little area where you go down to the bonfire, if you wait there for a little bit, the dragon will come down and allow you to run past him and get to the bonfire that's past him, which is a pretty decent bonfire. It's a good bonfire to have for that area. The first time I played this game, though, I didn't know you could do that and just stand there and the dragon would come down, so I just went underneath, took the underneath path with the rats. Then we reach the Undead Parish. This area here is called the Undead Parish. It's the next proper area in the game, and here the game starts to step up a little bit more. But if you manage to overcome the Taurus demon and everything the game has thrown at you so far, it shouldn't be that bad really. When we progress forward, there is a skeleton which is going to go and close a portcullis, which is blocking your path through to the Undead Parish proper. You can rush really quickly and take down that skeleton so he doesn't close the portcullis, which is a really awesome thing that most games wouldn't allow you to do, but Dark Souls does, because Dark Souls is awesome. And here we also have a boar. The boar is supposed to be taken down with alluring skulls. You're supposed to throw alluring skulls into this fire and take him down that way. But it's not really conveyed to the player properly. Now, yes, the game places alluring skulls right on top or right above this fire, but no player would really think to do that, because again, that's not something you would normally do in games, but that's trying to, as Dark Souls' way of trying to show you to look out for interesting combinations and different ways that you can interact with your environment to deal with the enemies that you're going to be faced with. It's a pretty decent concept really, and I do quite like this encounter. Going underneath then, we have a good ambush with loads of pretty easy hollows. This is similar to a way in which we're going to be ambushed later on, where there's lots of very weak enemies that are all attacking you at the same time. The problem here is that Dark Souls' combat doesn't really work too well when you've got loads of enemies all together. The combat really feels best when it's you and one other enemy, like the Boulder Knights, the Black Knights, the Silver Knights. That's when Dark Souls' combat is at its best. Here, when you've got loads of very weak enemies together, their attacks overlap each other. The hitboxes are a bit strange sometimes, and you can get hit when you don't feel like you really should do, and hits overlap, and you don't really have a proper attempt to really take them down, like one at a time in a steady fashion. You have to just sort of jump and hope for the best. But still, this area is not too bad. Progressing forward, we go up a ladder, and the game has these sort of rafters which you can walk on, which is quite strange because your character's legs are very visibly not on the rafters. If you stand still, your character's feet are not on the rafters at all. But that's just Dark Souls for you. There's an item here, and the game sort of it's sort of showing you that you can walk on very thin surfaces and not fall to your death. It's sort of alluding at something which will happen later, where there's a bit more of a bigger, larger section like this, which we'll be dealing with later, but that's much later in the game. Progressing forward again then, we encounter some Boulder Knights. These Boulder Knights are sort of tougher than every other enemy you've fought so far, but they're not really too bad. They are quite strong, but yeah, especially at this point in the game, they feel really tough. But you can parry them very easily. You can backstab them very easily. They're not too much of a step up from the simple enemies we've been encountering so far. They just look stronger, and they have a different moveset, which I suppose makes them a bit more daunting to newer players. Progressing forward, we have some more of these very similar enemies. There's a path which you can take, which takes you to the other side of the portcullis, so you can open the portcullis, which was closed on you earlier, giving you a nice shortcut back to that earlier bonfire. But if you progress forward along the right side, across a wooden bridge, which looks like it's going to collapse, but it doesn't, you can then find 3 other simple hollows, and taking the right path along will then take you to the bonfire, as well as Andre the Blacksmith. Andre the Blacksmith will upgrade your weapons for you. He's an awesome guy. He's one of the best characters in the game. He feels like he's rooting for you. He never actually says anything to root for you, but he seems nice enough, you know? He's not too bad. You can buy Titanite shards from him, which are your upgrade material in this game, your basic upgrade material, which we'll be using to get all your weapons to a decent place before you can upgrade and ascend them on different paths. That's what the game wants you to do here, because moving forward we're going to be encountering a much tougher boss than the other ones we've seen so far, that it requires you to deal a significant amount of damage quickly. So the game is trying to hint at you here to upgrade your weapon to at least probably +3 to give you enough damage to actually take on this next encounter. Because then if we go back to that path that we were on earlier, where you had those 3 hollows outside the main parish proper, you then go inside and you're faced with a pretty powerful mini-boss. I don't actually know the name of these guys, but they're pretty intimidating. They're almost like mini tower knights. They're pretty decent size. They're much bigger than you. They're like the size of a giant, and they have big, thick black armor and massive shields. They look really cool. There's only actually 2 of them in the entire game, but they're very cool enemies. I would like to have seen them more. They're pretty tough, but you can circle around them pretty easily and take them down, and their attacks are very slow and well telegraphed, so you have a lot of time to punish them. This game is sort of throwing you a proper tough enemy here. This is the first proper tough enemy that's not a boss except for the Black Knights. Then we have a nice shortcut in the middle. If you go across from where this enemy was, get the Firekeeper salts on the side, which allows you to upgrade your Estus flasks. We then have a shortcut which takes you back down to Firelink Shrine, which allows you to reuse the Firelink Shrine for this next area if you want to. Usually most people will just use the Undead Parish bonfire, but you can use the Firelink Shrine bonfire for this next area and for this boss if you want to. So then that awesome shortcut is there. You go up the stairs, you've got another Boulder Knight, and then you've got loads of hollows. This is a big massive hollow ambush like the one I mentioned earlier, except with about 10 hollows. And here we have a channeler. The channelers, their main ability is they can buff up enemies around them and make them deal more damage. He buffs up all of these hollows and makes them deal way more damage to you. You have to play it very safe here and sort of funnel them all down into their area and then take them on as best as you can with sort of stabbing attacks in front of you. If you just sort of do a normal attack, like a normal right swing, it will end up hitting the wall. You have to do proper stabbing attacks here. The Uchigatana is really good here. And then taking down him and the hollows, you can then go to the boss fight. But first, we want to go around, take on another Boulder Knight and go upstairs, and you'll be encountered with another NPC in a cage. It's your choice here if you want to take him out. Well, let him out or take him out. You can either let him out of his cage or take him out and kill him. He will end up doing some bad things later on in the game, but it's okay to leave him here and allow him to come back to Firelink Shrine for now. You can take him down an easier way later. Then we progress up to the Bell Gargoyles. The Bell Gargoyles are the main proper first blockade in the game, really. A very tough boss that many people tend to struggle with a lot. I struggled with them quite a bit. I died a few times on my first playthrough because the game is teaching you to upgrade your weapon here. Because if you upgrade your weapon, get around, take out the gargoyle's tail, you deal a lot of damage to him very quickly. And then if you take him out quickly, before the second gargoyle spawns in, you have no problem. But the issue is if they both come in and attack you at the same time, then you're screwed. Most new players are very defensive when they play Dark Souls, and they always have their shield up, and they're always really cautious, and they don't want to be too aggressive. But sometimes you have to be aggressive, and that's what the gargoyles are trying to teach you is sometimes you have to get right up there and just deal loads of damage as fast as you possibly can. Try and dodge best you can, but take out that first gargoyle quickly, because if you have 2 of them, the boss gets a whole lot more difficult. Anyway, moving past them once you defeated them, you can summon Solaire for this fight, but it's up to you. Then you go up and ring the first Bell of Awakening. You've sort of accomplished the first main sanctuary of the game, probably the first fifth of the game. Earlier you got a key outside the portcullis, which when you open the portcullis, there's a key there. That's indicating that the next area to go to after the Bell Gargoyles is down in a locked door before the bridge which the Hellkite Drake breathed fire on. There's a door there. That's your path down to the next area. It's not really indicated very well, because you got this key before the gargoyle fight, and it's for a door that you've probably forgotten about by now. If the gargoyles actually gave you this key, that'd probably be better, but they didn't, so we just have to go with what the game gave us. And then you go down to the Lower Burg. The Lower Burg is a bit of a shorter area, which I don't mind. It's good to have some shorter areas. The Undead Burg and the Undead Parish are quite lengthy areas, but the Lower Burg is not too bad. It's pretty short and sweet, really. It's just sort of one alley, like a really dodgy alley in some bad neighborhood you don't want to go in. It's like that, basically. You go down these stairs, and you've got two dogs, which ambush you first of all. The dogs in this game move really weird, and they're really annoying. They're in every single FromSoftware game, and dogs are annoying in every single appearance. They're not as bad in later entries. They sort of toned them down from Dark Souls 2 onwards, but they're still very annoying. And no one wants to deal with these dogs, especially ones in this game. Well, no, especially ones in Demon Souls. Anyway, taking out these dogs here can be quite annoying because if they hit you, even if you put up your shield and they sort of bite your shield, they still can sometimes jump around and like you don't get a chance to attack them properly if you just swing straight away. But the best way to do is to have your shield up, then when they bite your shield, then try and get a swing in quickly. It works most times, but sometimes they jump away, which is quite annoying. Then you move further down the alley and you've got these sort of, I think they're called Hollow Thieves. I always call them assassins, but I think their actually official name is Hollow Thieves. They deal loads of bleed damage, they can parry you, they can backstab you, and their backstab is really cool. They literally jump on your head. It's pretty crazy. And they do these awesome flips. They look really cool, but they're actually very, very strong enemies because every time they hit you, it deals bleed damage. And the more bleed damage, it fills up this bleed bar. And if the bleed bar gets to full, you get blood loss, which means that you suddenly lose loads of your health in one go. These enemies are very difficult for newcomers. They're very challenging, but luckily there's not too many of them you fight in this game. They're only in this one area, and I think total there's only like 8 of them. So there's not too bad, really. But the main problem is the boss, which is the end of the alley, called the Capra Demon. Now, don't fight the Capra Demon straight away. Instead, go down the path to your right, fight 2 more of these Hollow Thieves, and then open up the shortcut back to Firelink Shrine. Because, believe me, you do not want to do the run down this alley and then fight the Capra Demon. Because these Hollow Thieves and the dogs will drain loads of your Estus flasks, and you won't have enough resources to get through the Capra Demon fight. The best thing to do is go down to the right, open up the shortcut down the aqueduct, which we saw earlier, which takes you back to Firelink Shrine. It's a longer run, but it's less dangerous. You only have to fight a couple of enemies to get back to the Capra Demon, because you will die to the Capra Demon multiple times, because the Capra Demon is evil. He's a nightmare. He's straight out of hell. He's awful. It's not the Capra Demon, actually. It's the dogs. When you go into the Capra Demon arena, you are immediately... The Capra Demon jumps right at you, and 2 dogs jump right at you. You don't even have a moment to think. Usually, half of the screen is still being covered by the fog gate, and you're already dead. That's what the Capra Demon's like. Immediately as you walk through, put your shield up. The best way to get through this fight is actually to upgrade your shield, because if your shield has high stability, usually you can dodge the Capra Demon's hit, dodge the dogs when they attack you, and roll, go straight up the stairs. And then when you get to the top of the stairs, there's a little ledge that you can sort of stand on at the top there. If you stand at the top of the ledge, put your shield up, then the dogs come attack you, take down the dogs, and then you can fight the Capra Demon one-on-one. The Capra Demon actually is not bad. The Capra Demon is perfectly fine. The Capra Demon is not a tough fight at all. It's the dogs. The dogs. So once you've taken out the dogs, the Capra Demon's fine. If you die after you've taken out the dogs to the Capra Demon, you've got to do it all again. And usually the Capra Demon is like a boss we'll be talking about later on in this video, where you will almost always die about 3 or 4 times to this fight every time you play this game. You will almost always die a couple of times just trying to get rid of the dogs, because the dogs are that annoying and you can literally die within seconds if you don't play it right and dodge at the correct time or use your shield and block at the correct time. Once you've beaten the Capra Demon, you get the key to the depths, and it allows you to go to the next area, which is the depths. But before we talk about the depths, we are going to be talking about a little bit more about the level and world design of this game, because it's something that I really do want to talk about, because One of the things that the Souls games became known for is having fantastic level design. And it began in Demon's Souls, but it did continue throughout the entire series. This was clearly a careful consideration by the developers as well, to have areas that often would weave back in on themselves to create clever shortcuts and ways to get to the boss of an area as fast as possible when you've unlocked secret paths. A fantastic example of this is the painted world of Ariamis, which we'll talk about more later. That level has just one bonfire, but throughout traversing the area, you unlock multiple shortcuts which end up giving you a straight run to the boss fight once all the shortcuts are open. One of the environmental designers for FromSoftware, Masanori Worogi, had this to say about level design. Before we even started developing the look of the area, we first decided on the general layout and then worked together with the 3D artist. So clearly, they figure out how the layout is going to work first and then adapt the designs after, so the level design is the main priority at FromSoftware, and this is evident in the overall world design as well. Hidetaka Miyazaki, the director of Dark Souls, also said, "Most of the areas were constructed by deciding on the general layout first and then working together with the 3D artist after. The map design was really what dictated everything else. Once we determined what needed to happen in each area, we would immediately draw up a rough map, and then once the basic layout of the area was decided, we would then work on the final details." Dark Souls is often heralded as having the greatest world design in any video game, and that's because of how interconnected everything is. When progressing throughout the game, you'll often get lost and your brain can't figure out where you are, but then suddenly you open up a gate and you're back at an earlier area of the game. The areas in Dark Souls often overlap and connect in such fantastic ways. When you beat the Taurus demon and then cross the dragon bridge, you can go down and unlock a shortcut to the bonfire you used before the Taurus demon boss fight. When you go past the Capra demon boss fight down to where the door to the depths is, you can go back through the aqueduct which connects back to Firelink Shrine. The Undead Parish lift connects back down to Firelink Shrine as well, and then if you go down from Firelink, you can reach the New Londo Ruins as well as the Darkroot Basin, Blighttown, and then you can open up a big gate to reach a later part of the New Londo Ruins as well. This world design is even better than the game ever really shows you as well. When you reach Sen's Fortress, you can look down and see the Darkroot Garden is right below you, and if you actually use dev tools to take your character down there, then yes, you really are at the Darkroot Garden. Same goes for the Tomb of the Giants. From that area you can see Lost Izalith, but if you do use dev tools again to take your character literally over there, yes, you really are in Lost Izalith. The game world is so closely tied together in such an amazing way, it really does go to show how well thought out all of this really was. Moving on to the Depths then. The Depths is quite an interesting level really, because it's very ugly, but it actually plays surprisingly well and it's got some pretty interesting concepts in it, except for one which is then really frustrating and can require you to potentially backtrack massively just to get one item that's really expensive that relieves one status effect. There's a give and take really with everything. Progressing down to the depths, first of all, you've just got your regular hollow enemies and a couple of dogs, and then you've got this cannibal. Well, I call them the cannibals. I don't know what they're actually called. And that's these big, butchy women. I think they're actually supposed to be women in the canon of the game, with bags on their heads that are huge and are carving up meat. There's only 2 of them in the entire game, and they never respawn. So once you've defeated the 2 of them, you're never going to see them again until you go into New Game Plus or start a new playthrough. But they're quite tough enemies, they deal a lot of damage, but you can backstab them very easily. I don't know if you can parry them, I've never tried, but probably not, given how big the weapon is and how much damage it does. But they're not really that tough enemies, but they're probably tougher than some of the enemies that you face so far in the game. Then you can progress down further, you come across a giant rat, which you can fight if you want to, and you can then, if you go down the little gap behind where one of the cannibals is, you can go down, fight the giant rat, and then drop down and go down this sort of slide, this sort of water slide, really, it's just a sewage water slide. If you go all the way to the left, you can actually make it right down to a later area where you can then go back up and get to a bonfire using a shortcut. Or if you don't go all the way to the left, you just fall down to a pit of cursed frogs. That's what I'm going to call them. I think they're called basilisks in the actual game files. These enemies with these giant eyes that are basically popping out of their head, and they spit curse on you. Curse is basically a status effect which builds up over time, like build or poison, but it builds up when you're in these fogs of curse, or you're within near vicinity of a cursed object, like the smoke that the basilisks breathe out, or crystals later. And curse immediately kills you. The second the curse builds up, it immediately kills you, and then after that, you are capped at 50% health. That's it, unless you have a purging stone, or you see a certain character in New London Ruins and give him 1 humanity, then he relieves curse for you. But it's a very punishing status effect, curses. It's really annoying when you get it, because the only way to get a purging stone is to go out of the depths, and you can buy them from the undead merchant that's in the shortcut back to Firelink Shrine outside the depths, but she sells them at twice the price as the guy by the gargoyles. If you go all the way up to where you fought the gargoyles, there was a character there, and he sells you stuff. He sells you purging stones for 3,000, whereas the undead merchant sells you them for 6,000. So the game punishes you even then. Even once you're already cursed, the game is punishing you more by having you buy them at twice the price from the nearest merchant, or make a massive trip up to the gargoyles and get them at half price. It's bizarre that they did that, but that's just how it works. You also fight loads of rats here and another channeler, and then you fight the boss of this area, which is the Gaping Dragon. The Gaping Dragon is a really cool design. It's a very unique design. When it first comes up, you look like you're going to fight a small crocodile, and then suddenly you realise that it's this massive, humongous dragon with like a rib cage with teeth. It's madness. The only problem with this boss is he has a massive amount of health. He's a bit of a tank, and some of his attacks have weird hitboxes where they can hit you even if you weren't really right by him. It's a bit strange sometimes, some of his attacks, but all his moves are very well telegraphed, very predictable, but the problem is, like I said, he has loads of health. That's the main problem with him. When you defeat him, then you get the key to the door down to Blighttown, and then we move down to the next area, an area widely considered to be one of the weakest areas in the game, as I said, Blighttown. Blighttown, when you go down here the proper way, which is progressing after the depths, you have these big giant creatures that are a bit like ogres or trolls or something. I don't know what their official name is, but you can backstab them as well, despite the fact they're a bit bigger and you wouldn't think you would be able to backstab them, but you can. They have spent a lot of time roaring randomly and not actually attacking you, but you can attack them, but they do attack you, with their clubs, and they always drop dung pies, which is an item you can get in this game where if you throw it at an enemy, it builds up poison, or I think toxic actually, over time when enemies are near this object when it's thrown. It's actually quite a helpful item, despite the fact that it's literally a dung pie, so it's a pie of poo. It's quite strange. Then progressing through the area, we have these strange creatures which jump on you, and they have this attack where they go, and then they jump on you, and then they like bite your throat out or whatever and deal loads of damage in one go, and I think they instantly kill you. The biggest problem in Blighttown, though, is these other enemies that shoot toxic blow darts at you. These, if you get hit by 2 toxic blow darts, it inflicts toxic on you. Toxic is like a worse version of poison. Poison in this game slowly drains your health. Toxic drains your health, but not quite as slow. It's actually quite fast. And you can go through your SS flasks really quickly when inflicted by toxic. And these enemies luckily do not respawn, so at least the game understands that these enemies are very frustrating. Progressing through, then you fight more of these guys and then come across a bonfire. Then you fight even more of these guys, and then you fight this really weird parasite creature stuck to a wall. It's really strange. It deals loads of damage if you go up close to it, or you can go around and whack it from inside of like a cage. And then it's guarding one of the best pyromancers in the game called Power Within. which is a pyromancy where you use it and then you deal more damage, but your health is constantly being drained. It's actually a really powerful pyromancy, one of the best ones in the game. Then we go down to the Poison Swamp. The Poison Swamp is just like the Valley of Defilement. Blighttown in general is just the Valley of Defilement of Dark Souls, really. But when you reach the bottom, you're in a Poison Swamp. There's loads of random items in this Poison Swamp and enemies and like mosquito bugs which keep flying towards you. There's lots of hidden items. But this area is really annoying unless you have the Rusted Iron Ring. The Rusted Iron Ring you get from going back to the Northern Undead Asylum, which is the first area in the game. But the problem is you don't really want to revisit that area until you're a bit stronger, because otherwise you can't take on the Stray Demon. But I usually just make the trip anyway just to get the Rusted Iron Ring, because it means you actually move at full speed when going through the Poison Swamp. Otherwise, you're slowed down by the water in the Poison Swamp, and it makes you move slower. So we push through Blighttown a bit more and get to another bonfire, and then push through further and get to Quelaag, which is one of the best bosses in the game, in my personal opinion. It's half spider, half sexy woman, basically. Topless as well. Great. But it's half spider, so, you know, there's only so far you can really take it. It's a spider. It breathes lava. It spits out lava and has like these fire attacks, but it's a really cool fight. Once you realise that if you go straight to the spider's left, you won't get hit by any of Quelaag's sword swings when the actual female half of her tries to strike you with a sword. It doesn't actually hit you if you're just to the spider's left. But this enemy has very well telegraphed attacks, quite a few attacks, but when you know them all, you know the right timing to dodge, and you can get a true mastery of this boss. It's the kind of boss where, like, first of all you get your ass kicked to it, but then after you've beat it a couple of times, you can probably beat it without even getting hit, really, because you understand the timing and you get a true mastery over this boss. I really like Quelaag. It's one of my favourite fights in the game. After you've beaten Quelaag, you ring the second Bell of Awakening, and the second Bell of Awakening means that now Sen's Fortress is open. But we can't get there yet. We have to get out of Blighttown, going through the exit. When you go out of the exit of Blighttown, you've got to sort of go up these wooden rafters or wooden shantytown type building things, and you climb up, and it's annoying because you can really easily fall. But on the way up, you do find a Firekeeper soul guarded by some fire-breathing dogs. And then you get out, and you have to sort of use a shortcut to get out by crossing the Valley of Drakes. You cross the Valley of Drakes, unlock a gate, and realise you're in New Londo Ruins. Then if you use a lift in New Londo Ruins, you go up and suddenly you're back in Fireling's Shrine. It's great how the world connects. Now, the Valley of Drakes, we had to cut through to escape Blighttown, but I'm going to discuss the Valley of Drakes more because it's quite a strange area. It's sort of like a bridge, like a connecting area between other areas, but it has its own title card that comes on the screen when you get there that says Valley of Drakes. But all it actually is a very long path between two cliffs where there's a skeleton dragon which attacks you if you try and take an item, and loads of these drake enemies that breathe lightning. They're sort of like small mini lightning dragons that deal quite a bit of damage. But this area just connects New Londo Ruins, Darkroot Basin, Blighttown, and, well, no, I already said New Londo Ruins. So it just connects those, but two different parts of New Londo Ruins. It's like a bridge area. It's quite strange, really, but it actually is good in its own way. It's a decent setting. It's a good idea. It has its own unique enemies, which are really cool to fight, and you very rarely get to fight them because usually when you go through Valley of Drakes, you're just cutting between two different areas. You're not really here for that long. But it is a pretty cool idea, and I do kind of wish that it was at least as big as the Lower Burg. The Lower Burg is almost like just a mini area as well, because it's quite short. There's only a few enemies you fight there, but I would quite like it. I really would have liked it if there actually was a boss to this area, like a lightning dragon you fought. But unfortunately, there isn't, so that's all we have to say, really. Next, I'm going to discuss the healing mechanics of Dark Souls, because the whole system of healing has been changed and overhauled in Dark Souls, and it is one of the core fundamental aspects of what makes the combat loop in this game so addictive. So, the healing mechanics we saw in Demon's Souls are just completely gone in Dark Souls, and have been entirely revamped. Now we have a fantastic new system When you acquire the Estus Flask, you automatically have 5 uses of it available to you. You can then increase this amount if you feel like you need to heal more by becoming human, which is a risk in itself, is it enables you to be invaded by online players, which means they can join your world and attack you. And then you need to use another humanity item to kindle a bonfire if you want to take the amount of flasks you have up to 10. Doing this makes the flame stronger, which allows you to heal 10 times. That's a way of effectively making the game a bit easier for you in this section of the game, or in that area where you kindle that bonfire. When you defeat Pinwheel, a boss which we'll talk about later, you acquire the right of kindling, which allows you to heal up to 20 times by kindling the bonfire, further to take it to 15, and then even further up to a total of 20 maximum. This consumes even more humanity though, so to kindle a bonfire from just take it from 5 heals all the way up to 20, you would need to use 4 total humanity, which is a very rare item and a precious item you really want to use and want to have quite a few on you in this game. So you usually will only really want to kindle certain specific bonfires you know you'll be reusing often, like Filing Shrine and the Undead Parish, or the one outside certain bosses that you may be having a lot of trouble with, like Ornstein and Smo. This system is almost like the game's own version of a difficulty slider in effect, really. Having just 5 Estus Flasks, you see, means you can heal less, and then if you feel like the game is too difficult for you and those flasks aren't quite enough, you kindle the fire, which makes the game a bit easier, at the cost of the vital humanity items that you really need. You can then kindle further and then further each time, making the game that little bit easy for you. It's a fantastic, rewarding healing system, and it's one of the strongest aspects of this game. The system of using items that are vital to potentially make the game easier is a great mechanic, and choosing how you want to use certain important items is a vital aspect of this game, because in Dark Souls, almost every item has multiple uses. Humanity can be used to kindle bonfires, or it can be used to make you human so you can summon other players to help with bosses, or it can be used as sort of an emergency heal, as humanity heals you to full health when consumed. There's a give and a take to almost everything in this game, and it's one of the reasons why people are still finding out small new things about this game to this day, and it's why it's just so damn replayable. So then now I'm going to talk about the Darkroot Gardens and Darkroot Base. I'm combining these two areas together because they are essentially the same area, but it means that I will be discussing one boss you should fight a bit earlier and one boss you should potentially fight a bit later. So progressing through the Darkroot Gardens is, you get there by going down past the Undead Parish, past where Andre the blacksmith is. You go down a path underneath him, and this is an optional area. Half of the area is optional, but you probably will end up defeating both of the bosses, really. The Moonlight Butterfly is the first boss, which you get to by going past some grass creatures. They're like mini trees that attack you. Quite strange, really. And if you progress down this path, there's an illusory wall bonfire, and then going past this, past a door, which is locked, and you need a crest to open it, which costs 20,000 souls from Andre the blacksmith. We won't be going there yet. If you progress down the path past this, to the right of this, then there's also some stone knights, which have a lot of physical defense, so they're very resistant to your attacks, and they're made of stone, obviously, which is the reason why. And they're quite tanky, but they're not really that hard to take down. They have a move which means that they cast a spell which makes you move slower. But this is actually a really good opportunity to attack them, because it takes them a few seconds to cast this, and usually you can defeat them whilst they're casting this spell. So whilst they do a lot of damage, some of their attacks are very slow, and you can pretty much take these guys out no problem. There's a secret path which has an enemy that's only ever in this one secret path, which are these sort of red salamander type creatures. They look a bit like salamanders, crawl on the floor. They're quite strange looking creatures. On this path there's just a few extra items you can get, really. It's not really that worth it to come down here, because the stuff you get down here isn't fantastic, but continuing on past the Stone Knights, then there's a little staircase which goes up, and up here is the Moonlight Butterfly. The Moonlight Butterfly is a boss which is always in the air, so you can't attack it unless you're a sorcerer, really, or a pyromancer. But it shoots these lasers which you dodge, and then eventually it comes down to feed and sort of rest and recuperate, because it's tired, so it has to rest. and eat some grass. And then during this opportunity, that's your chance to punish it, so you can whack it with your sword, getting quite a bit of damage. The problem is, usually, because this boss is optional, usually I'll end up coming in later. Personally, I just come in later because I usually come here and defeat the Moonlight Butterfly when I'm going to defeat Sif. That's how I usually play the game. When you do that, it's too easy. The problem is that usually I'll only come here at that point. I'm not going to come here usually earlier because I'm just wasting my time, because I'm not going to defeat Sif usually till later, but you can do. And then once you've defeated the Moonlight Butterfly, you get an Ember by going up the tower and some Homeward Bones. This is quite good, but only if you're going down one certain weapon upgrade path. And we're going to talk about weapon upgrade paths more in a minute. So after here, we go back to the bonfire. And if you have the Crest of Artorias, which is cost 20,000 souls from Andre, you can open this other door. This other door takes you to an area where there's loads of people. They are all from one covenant. And we'll talk more about Covenants later, so I'm going to completely brush past the Covenant bit here. But there are loads of different enemies. They're NPC characters that will all attack you because you're not a part of the Covenant. But if you sprint past them, there's a cat which you can talk to, which is to do with this Covenant. When you talk to the cat, they'll stop attacking you because they think, oh, you might be joining the Covenant, so we're not going to talk to you now. Going past here, you could drop down, and that's where you get to Sif's boss fight. Sif is one of the more emotional bosses of the game. It is the pet dog of an enemy that we'll be fighting later called Artorias. Artorias is a knight, a legendary knight, who is known because he managed to close off the abyss and stop the spreading of the abyss all across the land of Lordran. That's why he's legendary. He's known as being the only knight that could ever walk in the abyss. And this is his dog, but we have to kill his dog because we need to get Artorias' ring, which allowed him to walk in the abyss. That's the story reason why you come here. So you have to take down Sif in a pretty decent fight. Sif uses some similar moves to Artorias, but we'll talk more about that later. It's a really cool fight. It's awesome just fighting this giant wolf with a sword in its mouth. It's awesome. It just looks really cool. It's a great spectacle. It's probably one of the most iconic fights in this game. And it's quite sad as well, because when you get Sif down to, I think, about half health, or maybe only a third health left, the wolf starts limping. Which makes you feel really sad because it can't do all the moves it used to be able to do. It tries to do them, but it can't because it's injured. But unfortunately, you still have to defeat it, and then you can take the ring, which allows you to walk in the abyss. You'll need this for later, but you can do the Sif fight much earlier in the game. You can do it now if you want to, but it's not required until quite a bit later in the game when you have to go to the abyss. So now we've done the Darkroot Gardens, we'll go back and go along the main path which is supposed to go to from the Undead Parish, which is Sen's Fortress. So yeah, Undead Parish, the reason why the bonfire is so important is because it connects these three areas. It connects the Undead Parish to Darkroot Gardens to Sen's Fortress. So this bonfire is important for all of those, so it is an important one to kindle. So then we go to Sen's Fortress, which is the House of Traps. We got some snake people. When you go into the House of Traps, immediately you'll step on a pressure plate which activates an arrow trap where some arrows are shot at you. You can use this against the enemies by running into the house, getting the attention of the snakes, then running back and stepping on the pressure plate as you do, which means the arrows will end up shooting the snake people and can sometimes take one of them out if you're lucky. We fight these snake people, then progress forward, and you see the main gimmick of Sen's Fortress, which is the traps. You've got these swinging blades which come across. You need to try and walk along this small, narrow passageway or pathway whilst trying to dodge these blades that hit you. If they hit you, you'll fall down to a big pit where there's loads of Titanite demons. And we saw one of these guarding the Darkroot Gardens as well, these big black enemies with these lightning spears. Which shoot lightning at you, and they're quite tough. They've got a lot of physical resistance. So there's a big pit of these down at the bottom here, but if you manage to get across here without falling down, then you can progress up. There's another one of these pathways with a lightning snake guy, a snake guy that shoots lightning. Get past him, then we've got a chest and another arrow trap. Progressing up, we see that there's now boulders which are coming down here, because like I said, this is truly the House of Traps. We've got boulders falling down on us as well now. It's introduced in quite a funny way, where there's a snake guy going up and is about to attack you, and the boulder hits him, and that's how the trap is introduced, which is pretty cool. It's a nice way of introducing this guy. Then we go up further, across some more narrow pathways, running past the boulder, making sure we don't get hit by the boulder. You can always swing out to another NPC here called Siegmeyer. He's pretty cool. His head looks like an onion, and people used to take the mickey out of his armor and the armor of all the Knights of Katarina, which is where Sigma is from, because all the armor they wear there has his helmet shaped like an onion, which is quite funny really, but it makes for some good design. Progressing up further then, we just keep sort of going up past these narrow traps, and there are lots of optional pathways you can go here, where you can find some cool items, and you also encounter your first mimic, which I'm going to talk about now, because mimics are really cool. They're one of my favourite enemies in all the Souls games. I'm very disappointed they're not in Elden Ring, but mimics are basically chests. For all intents and purposes, they are a chest. They look like a chest, and they have an item in them, but the problem is when you open mimics, instead of regular chests, the mimic will just grab you and eat you because it's disguised as a chest. It's not really a chest, but it does have an item. And then if it tries to eat you, or if you whack it, which is why I always say it's always best to whack every single chest you come across just in case it's a mimic, then it turns into its proper form, which is basically a chest with a big tongue, arms, and legs. It's very strange, but it looks really cool, taken straight out of Dungeons and Dragons. But it's a very cool design for an enemy, and I just really enjoy fighting these. Usually if you know it's a mimic, it's not going to cause much damage because you're prepared for it, so you're only really going to hit it if you know you can take it on. But the problem with mimics is, for new players, it's a bit of a troll, isn't it? Because you always have open chests. You don't think chests are ever going to be anything but cool items. And no, this time it's an enemy that's just going to eat you. It's quite funny, really. So then we get out of the main trap area of Sen's Fortress from the top, progress upwards even more, and there's a big giant throwing boulders at you. These giants, they have quite a bit of health, and they do quite a bit of damage, but their main attack that they do when you end up fighting them is this big flailing attack, and once they do that attack, they're tired, and they have to take a couple of seconds to breathe, so you can take them out pretty quickly. We'll be taking that guy down a bit later though. Now we're going to be going up Sen's Fortress properly, up the stairs, up the ladder. There's a big jump you can make, and if you make that jump, there's a guy inside a house who can sell you large titanite shards, which is very good for upgrading your weapons. And there's a key to a cage, which allows you to have access to shortcuts in Sen's Fortress. It's a cage that you can get in at the top of Sen's Fortress, and it takes you all the way back down to the bottom of Sen's Fortress, which is a good shortcut if you want to use the Undead Parish bonfire. So progressing up then further, there's another couple of enemies, some more tight walkways, but when we get to the top, we get to the Iron Golem, which is the boss fight of this area. He's basically the Tower Knight from Demon Souls reused. He's not quite as tall as the Tower Knight. He doesn't have a shield, but it's the same gimmick. You want to hit his ankles and then he eventually falls down, and you use that as an opportunity to do a lot more damage to him. There's not really much else to say really. The Iron Golem is just the Tower Knight. It's just another version of the Tower Knight, which is alright because obviously Demon Souls wasn't as successful as Dark Souls. Dark Souls was the more successful game, so they wanted to reuse some of the ideas. The Iron Golem though, it's not much to write home about except the fact that one of the hitboxes of one of its grab attacks is massive. Even if you're standing behind the Iron Golem, it can grab you by using this attack. It tries to grab you if you're in front of it, but if you're behind him, it still teleports you into his hand. It's very strange and very annoying. You can summon an NPC to help you out here as well, and he'll come. He's called Iron Tarkus, and he can literally take on the Iron Golem one-on-one. It's crazy. Anyway, after you defeated the Iron Golem, then there's a little circle. You touch this circle, and you can get taken by these demon bats up to Anor Londo. But before we talk about Anor Londo, we need to talk about the weapon upgrade system of this game. Upgrading your weapon is obviously a good thing to do, but it's quite complicated in Dark Souls. So I'm going to go through all the different ways in which you can reinforce and modify your weapons in this game. You can sort of upgrade them in a regular way, where you can upgrade them from +0 to +15. So you just upgrade regular weapons. All it will do is increase their base damage with either strength or dexterity scaling. It upgrades the regular damage it does, as well as how much scaling it does with strength or dexterity points. It is pretty good. It's probably the best and most basic one to do, but some other upgrades are better for certain things. So you can also apply elemental qualities to different weapons. So you can upgrade weapons down the crystal path, which can only be taken to +5. It allows them to deal more physical damage than regular weapons, but they break pretty quickly. There's also the raw upgrade path, which increases the amount of damage that weapons deal. It just increases the physical damage. It doesn't increase any of the scaling damage. And you can only take them to +5. So it's usually good for new players, but it's a bit of a trick really, because none of the weapons end up becoming massively powerful. They're just decent. It's a bit simpler for newer players, I suppose. Lightning upgrades take weapons to +5 as well, not +15. It's usually quite popular with sort of lower PvP stuff. I don't really delve into that, but that's because a lot of armor and shields have low lightning defense. But this is how you deal lightning damage on your weapons, basically. You can get magic weapons as well. So it means that weapons will deal magic damage, and the damage is increased by the intelligence stat. But doing this will then reduce dexterity and strength. There's also enchanted weapons, which is a different ascension path, which allows weapons to deal magic damage, and it increases intelligence stat, but it's at even higher than the magic upgrade path. And that only takes them to +5. Then there's the Divine Path, which is the Divine Ascension Path. It allows weapons to deal magic damage, but it adds Divine. So Divine effects, and it increases Faith scaling instead of Intelligence scaling. Then there's Fire Weapons, which is sort of like Lightning, except this deals fire damage. Then there's Occult. Occult is similar to Faith, except it adds occult effects this time. Then there's Chaos. Now, Chaos is quite strange. The Chaos upgrade path is really weird. The Chaos path allows weapons to deal fire damage, and it scales with humanity. This is quite strange. It's good for low-level players, but it scales with humanity. I've actually never used that before. I didn't even know that was a thing. I'm only discovering this now. I've done the research for it. Very strange. Then there is unique upgrades. So this is like unique weapons. And it doesn't increase the bonuses per upgrade level. It has a maximum upgrade of +5 that increases the regular damage greater than that of regular weapons. So this is like for your unique weapons that are one-offs, sort of, and there's no other weapons like them. Basically, there's too many upgrade paths in Dark Souls. That's the whole point of this section. This is what I was trying to say. There's too many upgrade paths in Dark Souls. It's too complicated. You need different types of resources for different upgrade paths. You can upgrade, like, you got magic and occult. You've got fire and you've got chaos. You've got enchanted and you've got magic. There's just too many different upgrade paths. It's just too many. It's just too complicated. This is something that they would streamline later on in the series by making things a bit simpler to understand. You still need these different resources, but the game sort of tells it to you in a more easy way to understand, because you'd never know all this stuff unless you just happen to go online and research all of this. You'll never find this all out for yourself. It's just too complicated, but luckily they did streamline it later on in the series. Okay then, so we've beaten the Iron Golem, and we've touched the little circle symbol, and we've been taken up by these demon bats to Anor Londo. But I'm not going to talk about Anor Londo now, because I'm not necessarily doing things in the correct order. So around this time in the game is sort of when you want to go back to the Northern Undead Asylum. And you can go back there by curling up into a nest and disguising yourself as an egg. And we'll talk more about hidden content and how hidden some mechanics of this game are later. But you get back to the Northern Undead Asylum, and around this is sort of the time where you want to take on the Stray Demon, who is back here. If you go into the room where you fought the Asylum Demon and stand in that sort of general vicinity, the floor underneath you will collapse and you can fight the Stray Demon. The Stray Demon is the Asylum Demon, except he's on steroids and has been doing some bodybuilding. So his health is insane, he's got loads of health, and his damage is like a million times what the Asylum Demon could do. He's quite annoying because his attacks have a tendency of just one hit killing you a lot of the times, or taking off 95% of your health, some of his attacks. But luckily they are well telegraphed, so you can see what he's doing and when he's going to do them, and usually you can sort of play around it. The best thing to do is to wait until he's done one of these big attacks, then go hit him 3 times, then go back, wait for him to do the attack again, hit him 3 times, then go back. That's the best way to take him out. In the Northern Undead Asylum, though, now it's been taken over by Black Knights. Black Knights are what we spoke about earlier. They're pretty tough enemies. They're soldiers who worked for Gwyn, and who's like the big bad of this game. And they're pretty tough enemies, and this area is taken over by them completely. So the good thing is you get loads of souls for clearing them all out and clearing out the stray demon, which is always good. We want more souls. But if you go back to the cell which you were originally locked in at the start of the game, there is this little child's doll, something that a child clutched and held on to when they were trapped in this undead asylum. And this doll is what we will need to go to the next area we're going to talk about, which is the painted world of Ariamis. The painted world of Ariamis is the first area of Dark Souls that was ever developed. I personally think they were developing this level, so they turned the 6th Archstone from Demon Souls into this level, because the 6th Archstone from Demon Souls was going to be a snowy level. And coincidence, the first level they designed for Dark Souls was a snowy level. So I think this was sort of them reusing the ideas they had for that 6th Archstone and putting them into Dark Souls. It's the first area they ever designed. The boss of this area was originally going to be Nito. Clearly they changed the direction of the game at some point. This is the first area they developed, but they didn't use it. Originally it wasn't even going to be featured in the game because they did the other stuff separately afterwards, and then they decided to sort of tack the first thing they ever did for Dark Souls onto the game as a bonus area. It just so happens to be the best, most well-designed area in the entire game. So here we've got some hollows, but then we've also got some hollows with these big bloated heads that deal toxic damage if they explode on you. You can take them out pretty easily, go around them. We've also got some of these sort of bird creatures which come and attack you, and they look really cool. They're a great design. If you get some items off of one of the roofs, they will come and attack you. And they deal quite a bit of damage. They're actually quite strong, but it's quite easy around here if you run back down the stairs to sort of make them come after you, and then sometimes they end up falling to their death. So you can sort of abuse that a little bit, but they're pretty cool enemies, a great design as well, and it's great that this area's got some unique enemies. Progressing through, we end up going round and then back down and then opening up a shortcut which opens back to the start of the level. Then you've got a big, if you continue pressing forward, you've got sort of a phalanx. You've literally got a Demon Souls tribute here right in the middle of this big courtyard in the painted world of Ariamis. It's awesome. They do look different to the phalanx in Demon Souls because obviously they couldn't use any assets from Demon Souls when creating Dark Souls. They had to sort of tweak everything, make everything look unique. So they do look a bit different, but they're very clearly a tribute to the phalanx, which is really cool because you've got a statue of a woman in the middle and then all these phalanx surrounding it. It's really cool. You've also got a big tower that you can climb up, which has got some more of the bird creatures at the top. Quite a lot of few hidden items around here and an NPC invasion. But if you go down, there's this little area you can go down in the main courtyard. You can go down and you've got some wheel skeletons. This will probably be your first encounter with these wheel skeletons, which are the absolute worst, most annoying enemy in the entire game. It's skeletons inside a wheel, and one of their attacks is they fully go inside this wheel and just roll towards you, but this roll deals so much damage. It can lock you into place and kill you in one hit if that attack gets you, because it just locks you in and goes and keeps doing that until you're dead. It's crazy. These enemies are a bit broken, but they're still very cool visual design. Like everything in Dark Souls, even enemies that are not as good still usually look absolutely awesome, which is just great. You can pull a lever here as well, which opens a shortcut. Well, it opens up all of the doors then in the entire level. It opens every single door and gives you a straight run to the boss fight. Now, before you do the boss fight, there's a dragon that you kind of want to go to, because it's like an undead dragon, similar to the one we saw in the Valley of the Drakes, but it's guarding quite a few items. If you take down this guy, it's a pretty cool spectacle. If you take down this guy, you can get all these items, and some of them are pretty useful, which is always good to have. And it's actually a really cool encounter because it crawls up the bridge. It's like it stomps after you up this bridge, and then it leaves its torso behind. Not its torso, it leaves its bottom half behind. It's pretty cool, and it just makes a really cool spectacle. Then we have a straight run to the boss fight, like I said. So you go up to the boss, and it's this woman called Priscilla. She's called Crossbreed Priscilla, and she is the child of two characters that we'll encounter later. A dragon called Seath the Scaleless, who betrayed the dragons, and a giant lady called Guinevere, who we'll also encounter later. and she is their child, and she was seen as being disgusting, so she was locked away. If I remember rightly, she was so sad that she was pulled into the painting. So she doesn't want you to attack her, she doesn't want you to kill her, because she says this is a safe space for peaceful people, people who are just sad, and it's a safe area. They're going for the emotion of the Maiden Astraea fight in Demon Souls, but the problem is here is with Maiden Astraea, at least all the enemies around Maiden Astraea, except for Garl Vinland, who is the main enemy you are fighting there, who was defending Maiden Astraea, at least all the other enemies don't really attack you. A lot of the Hollows are just sort of worshipping her. Here, you've just walked into the painted world of Ariamis and everything has been attacking you and trying to kill you. And then she says that the residents of the painting are peaceful and kind. It doesn't really make sense. But anyway, we stab Priscilla, we kill Priscilla. It's a cool gimmick, her boss fight, because she turns invisible. And she turns invisible and you have to try and track her based on the footsteps in the snow. The boss fight is quite easy because once you've hit her, she becomes visible again. And you can hit her quite a few times and usually kill her in one combo. If you stun her with like a bleed weapon or something, so if you deal quite a bit of damage. So she is quite weak, she doesn't have much health, but the gimmick of the fight is very cool anyway, and that's all that matters really. Then you leave the painted world of Ariamis, and you go back to Anno Londo. Now, I've covered the painted world of Ariamis before Anno Londo, I know, but now I'm going to sort of go through Anno Londo. The painting is in one of the first areas you reach in Anno Londo, so that's why I covered that first. So now we're going to cover Anno Londo in all its detail. The reason I covered the painted world of Ariamis first because it's a painting you find sort of halfway through Anno Londo. I didn't want to break the Anno Londo section into two to cover the painted world or do the painted world after, because usually I do it before I beat the boss of Anno Londo. So you arrive in Anno Londo and you see you've got these it's a very elegant looking area. It looks beautiful, it looks really nice and clean and tidy and almost too good to be true. And then when you progress through the area, you come across these knights, which are, they're not like black knights or silver knights, they're like very tall, almost giant-sized knights. They're like twice your size, really, and they have very long, sweeping attacks, and they deal loads of damage, especially at this point in the game. It's a lot of damage they deal, but their attacks are predictable, you can usually see them coming, so it's not too bad. We move past some of these and come to the first main bonfire of this area, where there's a firekeeper here. So luckily that means that the fire is already kindled. We progress further through and find this elevator, which takes us down. You step on a platform and it goes down. And then we see a gargoyle, one of the bell gargoyles we saw earlier, but now it's a mini-boss. And it's one of the good moments in the game where you feel like you're very powerful now, because it's sort of empowering the player, because this is a boss that you struggled with earlier, but now it's a mini-boss and you can take it down pretty easy. So then we have another strange part of the game where the way to progress after beating this gargoyle is to walk on some terrain you wouldn't think you're supposed to walk on. Anno Londo is a very visually appealing area, and lots of the buildings have loads of sort of paths that go between them to connect them to other areas, so that it looks very nice and it looks like a really awesome city. But one of one of the buildings has a ledge that connects a building to an area you wouldn't think you're supposed to walk on. It's quite strange. It just doesn't look. It looks like you should slide off of it. For all intents and purposes. Everything in Dark Souls has taught you, you shouldn't really be walking on this kind of terrain that looks like you could very easily slide off of it, because in Dark Souls you slide off things very, very easily. So it's quite a strange thing for the game to do. But anyway, you go up here, and then this is the rafter section I mentioned earlier, when in the Undead Parish there was sort of an area that was sort of training you for this. This is a proper section of the level now where you have to walk across rafters in a massive building where you will definitely die if you fall. These rafters are very narrow and you have to fight enemies on the rafters. This is a section in the game which I just think is bullshit, really, here, because Dark Souls does not do platforming well. Its engine is not built for platforming, and the combat systems when you're locking onto enemies also do not work on these tiny rafters. So, okay, you don't look on your camera, sure. But then when you do moves, these moves and attacks you do will move you. A lot of the time they move you forward. When you get hit by enemies and it hits your shield, you get moved backwards. So you're always moving all about the place, even if you don't necessarily want to. And you have to take down 3 enemies on these tiny little rafters. It's such a strange thing for the game to do, but all the Dark Souls games have some form of platforming, so it's a recurring theme throughout the titles now at this point. Luckily, Elden Ring would fix a lot of these kind of platforming problems, and so would Sekiro, luckily. So after the rafters, you reach this turning elevator. It's like a big tower, and you pull a lever, and it twists this tower around to form paths between other areas of Anor Londo. It's a very cool visual design that looks absolutely awesome. It's a cool concept, a cool gimmick, a cool idea, and it allows you to reach all these different places in Anor Londo. And it's literally the missing piece that connects all the different areas of Anor Londo together and makes traversing it much better. So from here, we light a bonfire outside a statue, and it's a statue of Gwyndolin, who is a character, one of the sons of Gwyn, who is the main big boss of this game, the final boss. He was raised as a girl because he was born a boy, but his father raised him as a girl because his dad wanted a girl, so he sort of raised him as a girl. And we'll be fighting him later on, because you need a certain ring to access a secret boss fight here, but we'll be doing that later. So instead of progressing through the area in the way you're supposed to, which is by reaching the proper Anor Londo main palace. And you go up this awesome staircase where there's stairs for giants and stairs for regular people, which is a cool little touch. Go up these stairs, we fight two more of these big, very towering big knights in this big armor. Go to the right, and here we have some of these demon bats, which took us up to Anor Londo. But here, we've got some which are fighting us with lightning spears. So, these ones don't like us for some reason. Take these guys out relatively easily, go down another path, and then up. And here we have the Anor Londo archers. The Anor Londo archers are so bullshit in so many ways. They are so evil, and they're terrible. Now, there's these 2 Silver Knights, which are sort of smaller versions of the Black Knights we've encountered earlier on in the game. And they have bow and arrow, a great massive bow and arrow, and huge arrows which always knock you back every single time one of the arrows hits you. And you have to walk up a small narrow pathway and stand on a tiny little ledge while being shot by these huge arrows that knock you back, and then take down these 2 archers which are shooting you to get along this tiny little narrow ledge and drop down. This is one of the absolute worst, most bullshit parts of the entire game, because there's nothing you can do. Even if you have a high stability shield, run up this path, get onto this ledge. Oh, one of the arrows hit you. You fall off, fall to your death. Oh, okay, run back up. Oh, you didn't stand on the ledge right. Now you've fallen off. Oh, now you've tried to attack an enemy, but you're on a tiny ledge, so you've fallen off. Now you tried to parry an enemy, but the parry animation knocked you off the ledge. Everything is wrong with this section of the game. This section here is the entire worst aspect of all of the entire game. Even the Bed of Chaos is not as frustrating as this section of the game to me personally. It's the only thing I've never been able to master. The Capra Demon, I have a general way now when I can roll past the dogs and sort of get up and take the Capra Demon out somewhat consistently. The Bed of Chaos, if you time your dodges right, there's at least a way to do it somewhat consistently. The Anor Londo archers are just so stupid and so annoying. I've never been able to do it consistently. I've tried every possible thing possible, every way imaginable. But, okay. Rant over. So then we get inside the Anor Londo Palace, light a bonfire, talk to Solarian, who might have feelings for him. Cool, you know. I mean, you know, if you want to Solar, we can go. We can go if you want to Solar. Then you go through Undead Parish properly. It's a very nice looking building, and we have another little interaction with Siegmeyer here where he wants to clear out some Silver Knights that have trapped him in an area. Clear out the Silver Knights. There's quite a few hidden items as well in this section of the game. You can get Havel's armor, and we're talking a bit more about Havel. Actually, we didn't talk about him in the Darkroot Basin section or the Undead Parish section. Havel is an enemy you can fight earlier in the game. He's very tough. He's got the best armor in the game. The strongest and heaviest armor in the game. So it weighs you down, but it's got loads of physical defense and loads of poise. And it's very strong, and he's a very strong enemy. But if you take him out, he gives you Havel's ring, which increases your equipment load so you can wear heavier armor and still roll quickly. You can get his armor at this section of the game, and a few other secret items which are pretty cool to get. And there we go into the main area, the main hall, the big main Analondo hall, and you can open up the entrance, which opens a path back to where you started, by the other bonfire and the big lift, which spins around. Then here you can also find a giant blacksmith if you go down a path down the other side of Analondo's palace. There's a giant blacksmith there. He sells you large titanite shards that you can upgrade weapons on different upgrade paths to Andre. But the main thing here is the one and only Ornstein and Smough. This boss is absolutely crazy and brutal for newcomers. I died about 50 or 60 times to Ornstein and Smough before I managed to beat them, and that was using co-op. That was teaming up with other people online, using Solaire as well, and just trying to get every possible advantage. It took me a week, about 3 or 4 play sessions to beat Ornstein and Smough. I put down the boss. Well, I put down the game, and I just had to give up several times before I managed to do them. They're very tough, but again, like everything in Dark Souls, it's an obstacle that if you overcome it, when you've beaten them, you are significantly better at the game by the time you've beaten them, and you get a good understanding of them. Now I can beat them on my own. I've beaten them solo multiple times. I've beaten them soul level 1. There's something very satisfying about that, and it's one of the things only Dark Souls does, where I got my ass completely kicked by these guys. Now I can beat them as a level 1. It's an awesome thing that only Dark Souls can really do. These are seen as one of the hardest bosses in gaming history. They're down on loads of top 10, top 50, top 100 lists as one of the strongest and hardest bosses in gaming. And they're a big roadblock for a lot of people. I'm sure loads of people gave up on this game when they got to Ornstein and Smough. I'm sure loads of people did, because they're very, very difficult. But what the game is trying to teach you is not to lock on, and the game is trying to teach you to evaluate enemies' attack patterns and wait for a proper opportunity. That's what you've been doing loads of times in this game, but here you're doing it with 2 enemies, and these 2 enemies complement each other in many ways. Ornstein is very quick, and his attacks don't do as much damage. Smough's attacks do loads of damage, but he's slower, and they complement each other, and you have to try and exploit their weaknesses in a very interesting way. And this is a fantastic boss, one of my favourite bosses in the game, and it's one of my favourite bosses in gaming history. After you beat Ornstein and Smough, you go up a lift, and you are greeted with a fantastic chest, as well as a bonfire, and Guinevere, who gives you the Lord Vessel. And the power of the Lord Vessel allows you to warp between different bonfires in the world. So you can now teleport to previous bonfires you've been to, which is very cool. And you can also join Guinevere's Covenant, which is the Princess's Guard Covenant. And now I'm going to talk about Covenants a bit more. So there are 9 different Covenants in Dark Souls. We've got the Blade of the Dark Moon Covenant, the Chaos Servant Covenant, the Dark Wraith Covenant, the Forest Hunter Covenant, the Gravelord Servant Covenant, the Path of the Dragon Covenant, the Princess's Guard Covenant, the Warrior of Sunlight Covenant, and the Way of White Covenant. Each Covenant in this game has different advantages and different things that it allows you to do. For example, the Way of White Covenant is generally simple, and the main benefit you get is that your online experience is connected to other people who have aligned with peaceful covenants, so the Way of White, the Princess's Guard, and the Warrior of Sunlight. It doesn't really do much, but it means that you're less likely to get invaded, and you're more likely to team up with other people who are going to help you in the game as opposed to hurt you. Then you've also got a covenant like the Warrior of Sunlight, where it means that you get all the benefits of the Way of White Covenant, but you also get a Lightning Spear miracle, you get Great Lightning Spears as you level it up, and you get Sunlight Medals as well, which are really cool, and give you quite a few souls if you feed them to Framt. Then there's also there's evil ones, like the Gravelord's Servant Covenant, where you can use the Eye of Death to transport other players into your game, and you get the Gravelord Sword and Gravelord Great Sword Dance Miracle, and then there's the Dark Wraiths, which gives you the Cracked Red Eye Orbs, which allow you to invade other players as well, and hurt other people's games by sort of challenging them and taking them on. So the different covenants in this game have different benefits, different things they want you to do. You get some shortcuts from some things, and you get core miracles and pyromancies and things from others. They've all got their own benefits, but they are one of the things which sort of allows multiplayer to have its own sort of flavour in this game, where people sort of side you with different factions and they do different things. Some want to help you, some want to hurt you, and it's just a pretty cool sort of meta experience in the general PvP, which still bleeds into the story and narrative of this game. And it's not like in Call of Duty, you go into a menu, press multiplayer, press team deathmatch. No, in this game, it's actually a part of the story and the narrative of the overall experience. Whilst you're there taking on bosses and experiencing the really awesome environment and the deep world of Dark Souls, you can still be doing multiplayer and matchmaking and fighting people. It's still all part of the story, which is one of the great things of this game. So then next we're going to talk about New Londo Ruins and the Abyss. New Londo Ruins is one of the 4 areas that you have to complete after you've beaten Ornstein and Smough. So when you get the Lord Vessel, 4 paths are open to you. New Londo Ruins, the Duke's Archives, the Demon Ruins, and the Catacombs. You can do these 4 paths in any order you want to, and some orders have benefits and other orders have other benefits, so it's entirely up to you and your preference which one you do first. New Londo Ruins is where we've gone to earlier. It's directly underneath Firelink Shrine. It's an area where you have to fight ghosts. To fight these ghosts, you have to be cursed. You can either be cursed at half health by the Basilisk, or instead you can use a transient curse, which temporarily makes you cursed without taking away half your health and gives you the ability to fight these ghosts. This area is very, very dark, conceptually and visibly. It's a pretty dark area, but it's also dark in its themes. This is a city that used to have loads of people living in it, but because the 4 kings started to get corrupted by the Abyss, someone decided to flood the entire city and trap everyone and everything in it, so the corruption of the Abyss never escaped. It's a very dark theme, and you literally, when you drain the water in New Londo Ruins, you are literally walking on the corpses of people that tried to escape. It's very dark. But that's your main objective in this area, though. You need to drain the water, fight past the ghosts, drain the water so you can get down to where the corruption started and defeat the 4 kings. This is the boss that you need the ring from Sif for, because Artorias was the Abyss Walker. He's the only person that could walk in the Abyss, and you take his ring from Sif, which lets you fight the 4 kings. The 4 kings are a pretty good fight. They really did kick my ass earlier in the game, and they're the last boss that I've really mastered, except for the ones in the DLC. I mastered Ornstein and Smough. Before I mastered the 4 kings, I never really seemed to be very good until I did my Soul Level 1 run when I had to master them. And then now I'm pretty decent at the fight. But it's because you have to deal lots of damage very quickly, and a lot of the times I felt like I needed to sort of be very defensive with these guys because lots of their moves were deal loads of damage, so I was playing a bit too defensive. I didn't really know how best to dodge their attacks while still dealing a lot of damage very quickly. That's the main gimmick. It's sort of like another version of the Gargoyles in a way, where you have to deal lots of damage very quickly, and that's the only way you can succeed in this fight, otherwise you get overwhelmed. One of the other 4 areas then is the Duke's Archives, which is probably one of the weakest areas in the game in my personal opinion. because you're fighting these crystal enemies, and what we've learned about crystal in this game is that crystal deals loads of damage. So your crystal weapons will deal loads of damage, but they break very quickly. Just like these enemies, they deal loads of damage to you, and it's very annoying. In this level, you have to defeat loads of crystal enemies, and then you take a lift which goes up, and you fight what you think is a boss, Seath the Scaleless. But the problem is, you can't defeat him. You have to die here. It's a forced death. The game forces you to die here. And when I played through this game recently, I died and got cursed. And then it's a fundamental flaw in this area, because you die, can get cursed, and then you are teleported to a different bonfire. So the bonfire that you died at before, doesn't matter where you were, you're teleported to a bonfire inside a jail cell in the Duke's Archives. And you have to break out of the jail. You can find loads of different items secretly hidden away in some of these jail cells. And you also find another NPC here if you've done certain things in the game. Then you break out of the jail cell, continue through the Duke's Archives, and then the Duke's Archives has this sort of staircase which spins around. There's a bit of a puzzle here where you've got to try and find the correct way to line up the staircases so you can get out of the Duke's Archives and get to a bonfire. Once you've completed this, found the bonfire, you can leave the Duke's Archives and then go to the Crystal Cave, which is sort of like the second section of the Duke's Archives, which is where Seath the Scaleless has been hiding out. This area has its own gimmick though. This area has invisible paths, so invisible paths which you have to walk on without knowing where they are, and you can potentially fall to your death. Luckily, the developers wrote a couple of signs on some of these invisible paths so that you do know where best to walk and where best not to walk. But it's still a bit annoying trying to get across all this stuff. Then when you get to Seath the Scaleless, he's a terrible fight. He's absolutely awful because his main move creates crystals which can curse you. I hate curse. Curse is just an unfair status to be giving people. It's too punishing. It's way too punishing. It takes away half your health and you've got to go and buy purging stones every single time you want to relieve the curse. And there's a massive huge run to Seath's boss fight. You have to go all the way from the Duke's Archives through the entire area of the Crystal Caves along invisible paths to get another potential chance at taking out Seath. It's ridiculous. I hate him. This boss is terrible. It's fundamentally flawed. Now I'm going to briefly touch on the characters in this game and the different NPCs. This game has multiple, what you'd say are sort of side quests. So Sigma's storyline you can follow throughout the game, and you first encounter him outside Sen's Fortress, you help him inside Sen's Fortress, and then he'll move to different areas and you help him at different sections of the game. And his side quest is mainly revolving around how he wants to be an adventurer, but he's not really good enough to do the adventuring because he keeps dying, he keeps getting himself trapped, getting himself in silly situations where he can't really do much. And his storyline is tragic because really, if you keep helping him, he will end up going hollow because he's lost his purpose, because he wants to adventure. And when you help him, he realizes that you're helping him and he's not capable of doing anything himself, and then he loses his purpose and he goes hollow, which in this game is basically giving up and getting just depressed generally, and sort of you end up losing yourself because you've slipped into this depressed state and then you're just sort of dead, really. It's basically losing your will to live is sort of essentially what hollowing is in a way. So the objective with Sigma is to make him feel like he saved himself. And there's this one opportunity in Lost Izalith, which is a section we'll come to later, where he has to survive the fight and deal a lot of damage himself and not take too much damage, and you have to still kill them, but sort of he'll be there with you and you sort of have to try and keep him over certain health so he doesn't die and he feels like he won. And then you're rewarded with a Titanite slab at the end of his quest line. Then there's another character called Solaire, and throughout the entire game he helps you, and you can summon him at different points, and he helps you with boss fights. And he wants to go and find the sun. He wants to find his own sun because he's obsessed with the sun and fire and light. And you need to try, with his quest line, you keep summoning him throughout the game, and then eventually he feels like he's found his own sun if you don't succeed. He will get a sunlight maggot in Lost Izalith. Again, Lost Izalith seems to be the culmination of all this stuff, which is a creature which lets out its own light. And what it does is it attaches itself to people's brains and makes them go insane, whilst also giving light. So Solaire, he will get this creature, and the creature will attach itself to his brain, and he goes insane, and you have to kill him. But then the only other option is to kill this creature, and then he will keep going on, keep progressing on his own journey, keep helping you, and then you can summon him in the final boss fight of the game against Gwyn, and then you assume that what happens is, in his own world, in Knight Solaire's own world, because in Dark Souls everyone's worlds are connected, and because time is in a very strange state of flux, you are doing these events while other people are still doing the same events in different parts in Lordran's history. So when you're summoning Solaire, you're summoning him into your world briefly, but he's still accomplishing the same task in his own world. So at the end of the game, you are presented with a choice where you need to link the flame or let the flame die out. The flame is sort of what's keeping the world alive and stopping it from being slipped into a state of perpetual darkness, where the abyss will end up taking over. And if you beat Gwyn, Solaire will also beat Gwyn, and that's basically the happy end to his storyline, is that he will link the flame. And when he links the flame, he's found his own sun because he's on fire and he is the flame. So that's sort of the correct and happy ending to his storyline. But there's also other storylines throughout the game. Some of them are a lot smaller, like there's a character called Big Hat Logan, where he's constantly trying to find new knowledge. He's world renowned as being an amazing sorcerer, but him constantly trying to find new sources of magic, and his quest for knowledge ends up leading him to go insane, because he ends up wanting to become Seath the Scaleless, which is this character that we ended up fighting just there, who betrayed the dragons because Seath the Scaleless was a sorcerer. He becomes obsessed with Seath the Scaleless, and he tries to be Seath the Scaleless by taking off his clothes. No one wants to see that. No one wants to see Big Hat Logan without any clothes on. Anyway, that's his storyline. I'm not going to go through every single storyline, but the other major one is the storyline with Petrus. Petrus is this character who we saw who teaches you miracles, but he is obsessed with Milady, who is this woman that's come from Thorland, and she has been sent here on a pilgrimage. And she goes on a pilgrimage, but what she doesn't realise is this is a pilgrimage to her death, because she's been sent here to die. Essentially, the people that have come here to protect her are actually on a secret quest by the church to kill her. So they're going to kill her, and Petrus is going to kill her if you save her. So part of your storyline is down in the Tomb of the Giants, which we'll be talking about in a bit, and you have to try and save her from these people who are down here. They've gone hollow, and they're going to end up killing her, because that's her storyline, is that she ends up dying. But if you save her, then Petrus will kill her himself. So the only true well, there's no happy ending to the storyline. If you kill Petrus, then Rhea, you think, survives, but she'll still end up going hollow, because she's so sad that she feels like she doesn't have a purpose, and she gets taken by some of the channelers to the Duke's archives, where she's locked in prison and she ends up going hollow. There's no real happy ending to anyone's storyline in this game, really, to be fair. Everyone always dies. And there's lots of other smaller character quests, small interactions, and characters will move from one place to another, and you sort of can get some low significance by some things that happen. Some characters just ask you to go and kill a boss, and then they'll be very happy and reward you with something. But there's lots of small things like this in this game, and it's like side quests again, which feel like... I can't always describe it in Dark Souls, but because everything is so connected, there's never any cutscenes, it almost just feels like the real world a lot more, because you're just walking around the world. Characters move from place to place, sometimes without you even realizing why, and you're just talking to them, they're asking you to do things. It just feels more like a real world than other video games. It's very, very awesome. Okay, then now we're going to talk about the Demon Ruins and Lost Izalith, which is one of the other sections in the game you have to do, the last 4 sections. Demon Ruins is down past Blighttown. You keep progressing past there, and you reach an area called the Demon Ruins. It's actually very, very linear, this section of the game. First of all, there's a boss called the Ceaseless Discharge, which does sound a bit weird. It's a bit of a weird name for a boss, Ceaseless Discharge. You go into the boss arena, nothing happens. Then you keep walking and you find an item there. You pick up this item and you realize that there's a big boss there, and this Ceaseless Discharge has been guarding over one of his sister's corpse. And what you've done when you've picked up an item is you've taken all the corpse's clothes off. That's not very good. You've looted the corpse and just taken all of the clothes. You just left a naked corpse. Of course the Ceaseless Discharge is not going to be happy. So he starts attacking you. And this boss is just a tragedy, because you can fight the boss normally, but it's not very good. And that's not how you're really supposed to do it. It's supposed to have lore significance. So if you run back to the fog gate that you came through, the Ceaseless Discharge jumps to try and get to you. But he can't get to you from there, because there's a big gap underneath you, and he was standing in an area with slightly raised flooring. So he can't get to you from there. You whack his arms and then he falls off. He falls off to his death. And that's the end of that. Keep progressing through the Demon Ruins. We find some Capra demons, but they're not bosses. They're mini-bosses now to make you feel empowered, as well as Taurus demons, and some of these stone creatures, and worms, which degrade your equipment if they spit on you. The enemies here are not very good. They're quite weird designs that don't necessarily fit. They feel a bit all over the place. But then we progress further and we encounter the Demon Fire Sage, who is another skin of the Asylum Demon and the Stray Demon. Except this time, he's on fire, but for some reason, he's weak to fire. Where is the logic in this? He's a Demon Fire Sage who is weak to fire, but is on fire. I don't understand. He's just another reskin of the Stray Demon, except with a bit less health than the Stray Demon, and he has the same attacks, except I think one new attack. He's not a very good fight, really. He's another reskinned boss, and we're just going to move past him. We will then encounter another boss. So 2 bosses back to back, except with a bonfire in between. And this is the Centipede Demon. He's a crazy, flailing creature that's all over the place. And he's not really one of the best bosses, but I've always found him very easy. The only thing is that this boss is basically, the entire arena is lava. You only have very small areas you can stand on. If you cut the Centipede Demon's tail off, you get a ring which allows you to walk on lava. Otherwise, you'll get it when you defeat him. I've actually never cut off his tail and got the ring, and then gone back into the boss arena with the ring on. I've actually never done that. I've only ever defeated him on the small little path, because I've usually defeated him first or second try. Even on my first go through this game, he was not really much of a challenge, really. And then when you defeat him, you get this ring, as I said, which allows you to walk on lava, and then you walk through a tunnel, and then you're surrounded by lava. So obviously we've got to put the ring on. Put the ring on, and you go through, you go to Lost Izalith. Lost Izalith, it gets a bad rap, but the area itself I don't think is too bad. Once you get across the lava, so you walk across lava, and there's a bonfire, a hidden bonfire behind an illusory wall, and if you keep walking, you get up to the Lost Izalith proper area, and this area is okay. It's not on lava. You encounter some of these sort of statue creatures which breathe fire on you, which we encountered in the Demon Ruins as well, and they're not too bad. We also encounter Chaos Eaters, which are some very cool designed enemies. They look quite strange, but they have like teeth inside their head. It's very weird, but they look really goofy. And they're pretty decent design as well. And we encounter one of the Daughters of Chaos as an NPC here, who attacks you and you can take down. This area is pretty short but sweet. It gets a bad rap, Lost Izalith, but this specific section of it, I don't mind at all. The Bed of Chaos boss fight, on the other hand, is terrible. It's basically a platforming boss. You slide down, and you see this big spectacle. You think, okay, this is an awesome creature. We're going to be fighting this. But no. You have to run to one of the Daughters of Chaos on the left, whack it, and it disables half of the Bed of Chaos's sort of shield in a way, protecting her. Then you go to the right side, but the floor is now starting to collapse. So, and the Bed of Chaos has these sweeping attacks which knock you back. So it will knock you into the holes and kill you instantly because of these holes in the floor and because the hands knock you back. Then you go to the right one. You probably died a couple of times here. You go to the right one, take it down, same thing's now happening, except it's even more extreme. Now both of its hands are doing sweeping attacks, which knock you back. And now both sides of the floor are collapsing. And now you've got to do a big jump to a part of a wooden trunk in the middle, whilst these two hands are constantly trying to get you, and you've got to dodge all these holes in the floor. And then when you get to the actual Bed of Chaos that's trapped inside this big crazy, not trapped, but it's inside this big crazy tree monster, you whack it and kill it with one hit. It's a disappointing boss. Lost Izalith, I don't think it's as bad an area as people say, because it's not great, but it's not hard. So even though the concepts and gimmicks they're going for here are not great, at least you get through it very quickly. Now we go to what is probably my least favourite. No, I'd say the Duke's Archive as a Crystal Cave is probably my least favourite area in the game. But the Catacombs and Tomb of the Giants are not very good. So the Catacombs is an area which actually some people probably ended up doing first. It's the other path from Firelink Shrine. So you can go up to the Undead Parish, or you can go down to the Catacombs. The Catacombs are where we had these infinitely respawning skeletons that do a lot of damage to you. Except now, obviously, we're stronger, so now we can go down there. The Catacombs itself, no, I was going to say it's not bad, but no, it's a terrible area. The skeletons I find annoying. The necromancers are the reason why the skeletons are infinitely respawning. So the gimmick is you take out the necromancers, then the skeletons stop respawning, so then you can focus on the skeletons. And the necromancers are seen as mini-bosses, so when you kill them, they don't come back. So you go through the catacombs, and the gimmick is you've got to try and push these levers to turn over these pathways, and then you can sort of progress through the level. So you get through one section, kill a necromancer, push in one of these levers which turns over a pathway, which means you can get to the next area. Then kill a necromancer, pull a lever, turns over a path, and you get to the next area. And you progress through the area like this, and you keep going down and down and down and down and down. If you're a veteran player, you realize that actually you can make a couple of jumps to skip some of these areas, which allows you to get through the area quicker. Or if you're very experienced, or if you just know the gimmick, you can actually drop straight down to the bottom of the catacombs just by jumping off of a couple of areas, and you can skip most of this level entirely, which is always pretty good to do. So that when you get to the bottom, on the way down you find the Dark Sun's Ring, which allows you to fight Gwendolyn back at Analondo, which we'll be talking about later. And then you get to the boss fight of the area. You have to fight a couple more of these annoying skeletons. There's another blacksmith as well here called Vamos, who has quite a strange voice, and he can ascend your weapons on different paths, and he also acts as a merchant. But if you keep pushing past, we get to this boss fight, which is Pinwheel. Pinwheel is the absolute easiest boss in the game, which lends credence to a theory many people have, which is that this was meant to be an area that you could do earlier in the game, which is why Pinwheel is one of the easiest bosses in the game. But the problem is then, how come the area is so tough? How come the necromancers infinitely respawn skeletons and all that? It's a very difficult area if it's meant to be an early area in the game, and it's very tricky getting out of here if you don't have the Lord Vessel, so you don't have the ability to warp. But Pinwheel is basically like the Fool's Idol from Demon Souls, where it copies itself and it's got loads of different copies of itself. But the problem is, it's got that little health. If you're doing this much damage at this point in the game, you can literally kill it in 3 hits before it even has a chance to spawn any of its clones. So you usually never get to see it. You never get to even hear the boss music, which sounds alright, to be fair. Then we have the Tomb of the Giants, which has its gimmick, which is that you can't see. So you either have to use one of the skull lanterns, which the necromancers dropped, which means you can't use a shield. You have to use the lantern as a light source. Or you can put a sunlight maggot on your head, which you would have got from Lost Izalith, which means that you just swap out your helmet and then you can see. Or I think there's a miracle called Cast Light, which acts a bit like a lantern, and but it's a miracle. So there you go. The Tomb of the Giants has giant skeletons which deal loads of damage. This area I personally think is terrible. I think it's absolutely awful. You can't see, even with a skull lantern, you still can't see very far in front of you. The giants deal loads of damage. There's this one area where if you want to get this one ember to ascend your weapons on a certain path, you literally get ambushed by about 5 giant skeletons at once, and you're guaranteed to die, so it's basically a suicide run. And then if you go the correct path, you come down to a bonfire, and luckily this area has 2 bonfires. So getting to these different bonfires, usually you're okay. A lot of the enemies are not before the first bonfire, so your trek from Pinwheel to the first major bonfire is quite short, and there's not too many enemies on there. Your main, obviously, enemy is gravity. You don't want to fall to your death because you can't see properly. But if you get to the first bonfire, usually you'll be okay. And then you encounter Patches. Patches makes his appearance here, and his trick this time is he's going to say that there's loads of treasure down in a hole, but if you step to go into the hole, it pushes you down to the hole. And if you come back up, if you're a cleric, he still kills you. But if you forgive him, then it's okay, and then you'll go back to Firelink's Shrine and act as a merchant. But I always kill Patches, so there you go. This is also where Rhea's storyline is, where you'll find Rhea down here, and you'll have to rescue her from the 2 people that have turned hollow and are going to kill her. Then we keep pushing forward and we get to the Gravelord Nito boss fight. This boss fight, the gimmick of this boss fight is that there's loads of infinitely respawning skeletons around Gravelord Nito. But Gravelord Nito also has area of effect attacks, which means that he'll do that quite frequently and kill pretty much every single skeleton around him. This boss is not too tough, but also not too easy, because Gravelord Nito himself, his attacks are very predictable, very easy. His area of effect attack is very obvious when he's going to do it. You've got loads of time to run away. But the problem is, again, the skeletons. Because you've got to deal with all the skeletons that keep respawning all the time, it means that doing that whilst also taking on Gravelord Nito and trying to kill him and deal damage to him can sometimes result in unnecessary deaths. Especially because you can get giant skeletons attacking you as well if you go around the back. But try not to do that because it makes it harder for yourself. After this then, we've defeated all 4 of the main Lord Souls, and we can progress to Gwyn. But we'll be talking about the DLC first and some hidden content. I absolutely love hidden content in video games. I love it when developers deliberately tuck away little secrets for observant players to find, and the Dark Souls franchise has absolutely loads of secrets, from illusory walls that players can hit with their weapon to reveal hidden items, to small little secret paths that lead to hidden areas. This franchise is filled with them, but Dark Souls goes further than your average game, by hiding multiple levels from the player. So, an area we talked about earlier is the Northern Undead Asylum. To be able to return to it, the starting area of the game, the player needs to jump off of a moving elevator, then jump onto a random ledge, climb a broken staircase, curl up in a bird's nest in a ball to look like an egg, and wait for over 1 minute. Then a giant crow will come and take you back to the starting area, which now features a new boss, stronger enemies, and more cool items. Inside this secret area that you have to do all those steps to get to is an item that unlocks the second secret level of the game. So you need to figure all of this out, and then get this item, and then go to a painting inside Anor Londo and touch the painting. Doing this then takes you to the second secret level, which this time is a massive new level, filled with different content, new enemies, loads of items, a new NPC, and it's arguably one of the best levels in the game. It also features a new boss as well. The third secret level we'll be speaking about next, and this one requires you to hit 2 illusory walls back to back. The first wall hides a regular item, then you have to think to hit another wall behind it as well, expecting 2 illusory walls. Both those walls hide another level, which is basically 2 smaller areas combined, which we'll speak about now. The Great Hollow and Ash Lake. So the Great Hollow is basically a big platforming challenge with loads of little small paths you got to try and navigate down, whilst also dodging basilisks, which can curse you, and these little mushrooms which you can attack at the bottom. Making your way down the Great Hollow is a chore in itself, but luckily at the bottom you reach a beautiful area called Ash Lake. This is just a beach with loads of awesome arch trees, which it's like a big sea. It's really peaceful and tranquil. It's a really nice area. It's got its own music, which is awesome. It just looks really cool. You got a Hydra you can fight there as well, which has got like 6 heads, and it's like a mini boss. And it's not the best fight, but it's a pretty cool mini boss. It's a pretty cool unique enemy. It looks really awesome, and it makes the chore of getting down the Great Hollow pretty good. At the bottom here as well, we've got where you find one of the Covenants, which is also really cool. Lots of hidden items as well down here. But the problem is, there's no boss here. And I guarantee you, they intended to have a boss here at some point. Maybe the Hydra was intended to be a boss at some point in development, because it does seem like it should be a boss, really. The problem is there's no boss down here, and it's the only area in the game without a boss, a major area which doesn't have a boss, which is quite strange really when you think about it. And if you get down here, because this is a secret area that you find in Blighttown, if you end up down here at Ash Lake, before you've got the Lord Vessel so you can teleport, getting back up the Great Hollow, which is a platforming challenge meant to potentially kill you if you fall off some of these ledges, getting back up there is an absolute nightmare, but it's worth it just to see the awesome beauty that is Ash Lake. Now, the other secret in the game we haven't talked about yet is Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn is a secret boss fight where you have to put on the Dark Sun's ring you find in the catacombs and then stand at a certain bonfire in Anor Londo, the secret one at the bottom of the lift. If you stand at that bonfire with the ring on, you can then talk to Gwendolyn and you can join his covenant, or if you go through a fog gate, you can fight Gwendolyn. The boss fight is not really too good, really. He just shoots. It's an infinite hallway, and he shoots magic at you, and you've got to try and get up to him quickly and attack him as fast as you can before he teleports further down this infinite hallway. If you defeat him, there's several chests at the end which have some decent items in, and one empty chest, which is very strange, and I don't quite understand why there'd be an empty chest there. It just at least have some humanity or some homeward bones in there or something simple. It's very weird having an empty chest, but it's pretty cool having a secret boss fight, and I did not know about this guy on my first playthrough of the game. I'm pretty sure I missed him, or maybe I did fight him but after, like right before Gwyn or something like this, but I don't remember fighting him on the first playthrough anyway. It's pretty cool having more hidden content. So now we're going to talk about the DLC. The DLC is, only Dark Souls would do this. You pay 15 quid or 10 quid to get this DLC, and to access it, you have to, first of all, think to go down to the Darkroot Basin. Go down a secret path you wouldn't think is around the left of where you fight the Hydra at the Darkroot Basin. Kill a golden golem. Free Dusk of Ulasil. Then go back to the Duke's Archives, go up the lift in the Duke's Archives, kill one specific random golem there that doesn't, it just looks like an ordinary golem. It doesn't look special really, except for the fact that it's sort of in a bit of a corner. And then get an item from there. And then now you have that item, you can go back to Darkroot Basin and go through a portal. It's so convoluted, and the amount of times for some reason I've done the wrong thing in the wrong order or something weird, the amount of times it's because the golem doesn't spawn as well if the Hydra's there. So if you kill the Hydra, then go straight up to the secret corner, the golem won't be there. You have to then quit your game and reload your game, and then, or teleport away and teleport back, and then the golem spawns. So There's loads of small little caveats. But then you get to go to Ulasil Sanctuary. You spawn in, there's a bonfire right in front of you. You go down this linear path, and at the end, there's a Sanctuary Guardian. He is basically guarding the DLC. It's a very tough fight. He sets the precedent for the DLC. He's easy by the DLC standards, but he's one of the toughest bosses in the game by Dark Souls 1 standards. So he's pretty tough. He's like half lion, half weird stinging creature thing. He's got some pretty cool attacks. Unlike a lot of the other bosses, if you go round by his back, where his backside is, usually with a lot of bosses like this, they won't do as many attacks, but he will immediately attack you. He's ready for that, and he's got that sort of claw thing which can poison you at his back, which sort of takes that into account. He's a pretty tough boss, but once you defeat him, you move to the Sanctuary Guardian, which is like Firelink Shrine, but for this DLC. Elizabeth is there, and she's a merchant. She sells you stuff, which is pretty cool, and she sells stuff at cheaper prices than some of the merchants in the main game. But we keep pushing through here, because Ulasil Sanctuary, there's nothing else here, really. You've got a nice little area. There's no hidden items, really. Nothing else to do. You can talk to Elizabeth. She'll tell you a bit about Dusk and how Manus has captured Dusk for some reason, and all this, and you've got to try and rescue her because Artorias doesn't seem to be doing it. And then you go to the Royal Wood. The Royal Wood is a reskinned version of the Darkroot Garden, but it's okay, it's alright with this being reskinned because it's so drastically different. The enemies are completely different. Even though it's reskinned, there's a story purpose for it because you're in the past in this DLC. In this DLC, you've travelled probably several hundred years into the past. We're in the Royal Wood now, and you can take on some of these really cool design creatures, which are actually the tree-headed creatures, which are like walking trees from the Darkroot Garden, except this is them several hundred years ago. And you see the original purpose was they were cutting the trees. These small trees were actually cutting the leaves of the larger trees and with their scissors. And they attack you with their scissors, which is a pretty cool attack. You've also got some more of the stone knights that we saw from the Darkroot Garden, and you see that originally they were a bit different. They had a different moveset. Wow, they lost their old moveset and got a different moveset in these hundreds of years. So we progress to the Royal Wood, and it's just a pretty standard sort of Souls area. It's a bit of a plain open space, and then you get down to the Artorias boss fight. Just before the boss fight, there's a creature, well not a creature, there's a guy standing there who looks like he's had a Bloodborne. And I stand by the fact that I think it was a reference to Bloodborne, because at this time, Hidetaka Miyazaki would have started working on Bloodborne at this time, when they were making this DLC. He was leading the A team to make Bloodborne, while the B team worked on Dark Souls 2. So I stand by the fact that he was a deliberate reference to Bloodborne. I guarantee it. Anyway, Knight Artorias is the sort of the boss of the Royal Wood, and he is absolutely awesome. It's like a proper Joel fighting this guy. It really is. It's a proper Joel where he is, obviously, we've heard about him before, Knight Artorias. He was the person, he walked in the abyss and he stopped the corruption of the abyss spreading. He's known as a legendary hero. And here we realize that he ended up being corrupted by the same abyss he was trying to stop spreading. Because the abyss is so dangerous, it spread to him and started corrupting him. And what we're doing now is, we're sort of trying to protect his legacy. Because we don't want this guy ending up spreading the abyss himself, and we don't want people to realize that he ended up becoming the very thing he hated. So we are putting him out of his misery. And he comes and attacks us, and we put him down. It's like a proper Joel because he has some awesome moves. He powers up and sort of, you gotta try and stop him from powering up and becoming even more, channeling the power of the abyss to make himself stronger. One of his arms is broken as well, which makes it very cool. Pretty cool. He's got a similar moveset to Sif, which indicates that him and Sif were fighting alongside each other for so long they developed a similar fighting style, which is really cool. And he's a really tough opponent. His attacks deal loads of damage. He's crazy. He's super aggressive. But this is a perfect example of a perfect Dark Souls boss fight, where you learn the enemy's moves. He's so aggressive, but you learn his moves because he's got tells where you know exactly what move he's going to do. You can tell. And then if you dodge at the right time, dodge the right way, you can block some of his hits if you've got a good stability shield. You can just about get in some attacks while he's doing certain things, and you can punish him when he takes a gap between some of his moves. And he is the perfect Dark Souls boss fight, really. Everything about Artorias is awesome. And when you beat him, you truly feel like you've mastered him. Because every time you die, it feels like you died, but it was fair. And that's exactly what the best Dark Souls boss should do. When you die, you feel like it was fair. And you learned when you died. And then you come back with a vengeance because you learned from that mistake. Now, I'm also going to talk about the other boss fight of the Rawwood, because it's exactly the same in that regard. And that's Kalameet the Black Dragon. You can only fight Kalameet properly if you get someone, a giant archer who you get access to after you've beaten Artorias. If you open the key to his room and you die to Kalameet once, because Kalameet normally will just breathe fire on the whole area, and you can't fight it properly unless it's shot down, because it's a dragon, it's flying all over the place. If you die to Kalameet once, or if you go into its area once, and then teleport back and speak to this giant archer, he will volunteer to shoot down Kalameet for you. He shoots one of his wings and injures him, so he comes down so you can fight him properly. Then, Kalameet is a massive dragon. This is a proper dragon fight. This is much better than anything we've seen in the series before representing dragon. This is a true awesome dragon boss fight where the moves are indicative of a dragon. It deals loads of damage. It's very aggressive considering how big it is. It's got moves that can punish you if you go around its back. It's got moves that can punish you if you're underneath it. But if you play it right and time your dodges properly, understand what moves it's going to do, you can take him down pretty comfortably without really dying very quickly. And Kalameet is a very fair boss fight in the same way Artorias is a boss fight, where it's very punishing, deals loads of damage. It's a tough fight and you'll die loads of times to it, but when you die, you feel like you learned. And you get better every time you die to this boss fight, which is a perfect example of a perfect boss fight. After this then, after you've beaten Kalameet and Artorias, well, after you've beaten Artorias is when you'll be moving there, to Ulasil Township. In Ulasil Township, we see that now they've changed illusory walls for the DLC. These illusory walls you need a light source for. They only open if you shine a light on them. And then you can access certain things, and you access in Ulasil Township a silver pendant. Silver pendant is used to block the new kind of magic in this DLC, which is dark magic. Dark magic is a new sort of type of magic for this DLC, where these spells, they deal absolutely loads of damage. They pretty much destroy your stamina, and you can't really block them without taking damage. The only way to dodge them is to roll them and use your invincibility frames when you're rolling, or you can use a silver pendant. If you use a silver pendant like an item, you have it equipped on your hotbar, you press X and then it sort of gives you a shield against dark magic for 2 seconds. And then if you time that right, you can dodge every single dark attacker that comes your way, which is really cool. The only problem is, obviously, it takes a second to use it quickly, and it's not permanently effective, so you've still got to time it right. So we've got these new enemies for the Ulasil Township, which are sort of these abyss-looking creatures which shoot dark magic. And there's some other sort of creatures. They've got like purple heads. They're quite strange-looking creatures, really. You've got ones that don't do magic, and you've got ones that do magic. They hit very hard because obviously this is the DLC, and this DLC is sort of meant to be done when you're as powerful as you can be at the end of the game, because everything here is very, very powerful and very strong. This area as well is pretty tough because some of the enemy setups here and the enemy placements are very, very tough and challenging. You'll have like a dark orb caster at the back, while there's like 4 other ones you've got to deal with in front. And because that dark magic caster at the back deals dark magic damage, which is very, very strong and very powerful, trying to take on these other enemies which deal a lot of damage whilst you've got that dark magic caster at the back is very challenging and makes for some tough enemy setups, but very rewarding. Once you've got through this area, you get to the Chasm of the Abyss, which is a different area at the bottom, but it's sort of connected to the little township. You sort of get there, you sort of get there naturally by progressing down the township. You reach the Chasm of the Abyss, which is filled with humanity. I don't quite understand the lore purpose of this. Again, you can tell me that in the comments down below if you understand why there is all this humanity here. Is it because Manus was sort of collecting the humanity? Is it because it's the humanity of people that got corrupted by the Abyss or died down in the Abyss? I don't quite understand. Or is this just the source of humanity? Are these creatures humanity in its original form or something like this? I don't quite understand. Feel free to tell me. You get more of these dark magic casters down here and these dark enemies. You've confined Sif down here as well. If you're down here, you'll see Sif, and Sif is trapped. Sif has become trapped by this sort of living embodiment, or these alive, sentient humanity. And Sif's trapped. And if you free Sif, Sif will then help you in the fight against Manus. And you'll definitely need help for the fight against Manus. So now you've freed Sif, and you go to the final boss of the area and fight Manus. Manus is what Artorias was trying to stop. Artorias was trying to beat Manus, but he failed. He was corrupted by the Abyss. And now we realize that the true hero, the person who stopped the spread of the Abyss, was not Artorias. Artorias failed. Artorias never did it. The person who's doing it is you. And you team up with Sif, because remember, this is in the past, so this is before you killed Sif. Sif is younger at this point. Sif fights with you using Artorias' fighting style, and he fights Manus with you. The main purpose Sif serves here is Sif is the distraction, which allows you to properly fight Manus yourself, without Manus constantly being aggressive, constantly attacking you, because Manus is the most aggressive boss in the entire game. He deals loads of damage, and he's really fast, is really aggressive, is like everything together. He's huge like a monster, he's fast like some of the smallest, craziest creatures should be, but he deals loads of damage. He's just like everything combined. He's almost like the true final boss of Dark Souls is what I would say Manus is, because he's really hard. Gwyn is like the story final boss. Manus is like the challenge final boss in terms of the challenge. And he is really, well, realistically, he actually, because it was the DLC which came after the main game, he actually is the final boss that was probably created for Dark Souls. So, there you go. And it's just awesome from a story perspective as well, that you team up with Sif and take down Manus. It's just a really cool idea. And then if you beat Manus before you fight Sif, and then you fight Sif afterwards, because obviously you can do the DLC in a different order to what you do the main game, you have a different cutscene where Sif recognizes you and then realizes that you fought together, and now suddenly you have to fight each other, and it just makes the Sif fight even more sad. I have finally, this video is gonna be crazy long. I thought it would be similar length to Demon Souls, but no, it's like 2.5 hours. Wow. So now I've got through all of that. I've got through everything in the main game. Now we're going to go to the Kiln of the First Flame and properly end Dark Souls once and for all. Here you get a gauntlet against loads of Black Knights. The different kinds of Black Knights you've been fighting throughout the game, using different movesets. You get a gauntlet of these enemies, which give you loads of different upgrade materials, which help you upgrade your weapons to maximum if you haven't managed to do it so far. And then you get to the fight with Gwyn. Gwyn is not a particularly hard boss fight, because you can parry him. But that's not the idea. It's not supposed to be challenging. It's supposed to be that Gwyn was the former Lord of Cinder. He is the person that kept the fire alive before. He was just someone like you, really. He was just a person who was keeping the flame alive. And now you're here because he can't do it anymore. And you need to beat him to take over the flame and to light the fire yourself, or link the fire yourself. So he's like a normal human guy like you. You can parry him just like you can any other humanoid enemy in the game. You fight him, he's got a pretty decent moveset really, and Gwyn is the kind of boss where you can take him on using any kind of fighting style, and that is what the developers intended. The developers wanted Gwyn to be a boss you can take on no matter what your play style is. It doesn't matter if you're a sorcerer, a pyromancer, it doesn't matter if you've got faith build, dexterity, strength, you can take on this guy no matter your fighting style and still have a pretty decent chance of succeeding. He's a pretty decent fight. He doesn't have too much health, but he does quite a bit of damage and is relatively aggressive. But once you beat him, you get a choice. you can choose to light the final bonfire, which means that you have linked the fire and essentially continued on. You've accomplished what King Seeker Framt, who spoke to you and told you that he wants you to link the fire at the game's halfway point, or when you ring the bells of awakening. He wanted you to succeed, Gwyn, and you are the next great lord. And you continue to link the fire, and you sacrifice yourself, which means that you revitalize the land, and you have gotten rid of the curse of the undead. That is what happens if you link the fire. And you get rid of the curse, but you continue this whole cycle of lighting the fire, but then the fire eventually fading, and then someone else will have to come and take over from you. Or you can beat Gwyn and then leave the boss arena. And you don't light the final bonfire. You leave. This is a choice. You just leave. You don't light it. And that means that you are the Dark Lord. You're the true Lord of men. And that is what Darkstalker Karth, who comes to you when you beat the 4 kings, if you haven't placed the Lord Vessel, that's what he wants. It means that you bring in a new era, which is the Age of Dark and an Age of Men. And you being the Dark Lord means that you are the supreme sovereign. That is how the game puts it, not how I put it. That's how the game puts it. After this, the cycle continues. You go into New Game Plus, and then you get to do it all again. Except a couple of things are different here and there, but not very much. It's basically the same game, just the enemies deal more damage and they have more health. In conclusion, what do I think of Dark Souls? Do I think Dark Souls is the greatest video game of all time? I think so. For me personally, it's my favourite game of all time. And I think for me personally, it's the perfect game. For me personally, this is everything I look for in a video game. It's got a really deep story that goes deep if you want to look into it. But it's not in your face like a story like a game like Life is Strange or the Walking Dead games, where you're just basically watching a movie, but you just press a button every now and again. Or these linear games where you have to do things in the way the game wants you to do them, otherwise you don't, like, you can't play. Like, you have to press A when the game tells you to press A. You have to press X when the game tells you to press X. You have to walk here, you have to shoot this guy, you have to do this one thing in this one way to defeat this one boss. Like, that's not how I enjoy my games. I enjoy freedom in games. I want to do things how I want to do things. And Dark Souls caters to people who play in that kind of way. If I want to shoot Gwendolyn when I get to Anor Londo just because, then I can do. If I want to just leave someone, like trapped somewhere, if I want to leave Lordran in his cell this time, I can do that. If I want to just run past every single enemy and not fight anybody and just rush and beat only like 5 bosses to beat the game, I can do that. It's a choice that you can make. And the game gives players freedom to play however they want to play. If I want to, like, that's the kind of thing. When I play Dark Souls, I think a normal game wouldn't let me do this. Like, a normal game wouldn't let me skip the first bell of awakening and ring the second bell first. But Dark Souls lets you do that, and it's got a cutscene for if you do that. If you want to do that, you can do it. That's not the way the game originally sort of planned for you to do it, but it accounts for that, and there's a choice to do that. If you want to skip the ceaseless discharge because you think, oh, he's really sad, he's just defending his sister's grave, and if you don't want to beat him, there is a way where, using the geometry of the level, you can skip the ceaseless discharge and leave him alive. And there's just loads of really cool things in this game where you actually have freedom as a player. And the game isn't being stopped every 2 minutes with a cutscene. And the game, like, what I really don't like, for example, in Skyrim is, if I just kill someone, I can stab them, right? A crucial character in the game. They just, like, come back and act like nothing ever happened. Or maybe you'll go to prison for a minute, but then you'll come back afterwards and then everyone acts like you never did anything. In Dark Souls, your actions have a consequence, and the game accounts for everything that you can possibly do, which is absolutely awesome. And to top it off, the game's got the best world design in the history of gaming, where The world connects together in ways I never thought I would have seen a game connect in that kind of way. Because it's like the game connects in a realistic way, where of course in real life the world does kind of connect on itself, doesn't it? And it's quite funny where sometimes in the real world I've actually sort of gone down a road and then realized that this one side road actually connects to this other area in the real world that I didn't realize it connected to, and I thought, ha, that's a Dark Souls moment, that is. But no, it's not that. It's just that the Dark Souls accounts for the real world connecting, and in Dark Souls, Lordran connects in that kind of similar way, where areas do connect to each other. You can see one place from another place, because in a fictional world, it should connect together in a way that the real world would do. And Dark Souls has got this fantastic world and level design where it always surprises you with shortcuts. And it's got this deep story. The gameplay and the combat, having this kind of stamina management combat, I think is very satisfying. It's very good. Parrying enemies is incredibly satisfying. And it's got this sort of... It's got this mastery of the game where, like, when you first play the game, it's very punishing and it's very, very, very hard. But then when you truly master the combat of Dark Souls, you can parry like a legend. You can just like I've got a friend who struggled with Dark Souls and gave up on it. And then when they were watching me play the game, they were like, wow, he can like parry and backstab enemies and just run around them like nothing and just speed through these levels. Because when you get a mastery of the game, it's like you truly understand like everything about the game, and it's just awesome, and you develop these skills that never leave. And then the thing with Dark Souls is when I go and play a different game, if I play a different game, I'm just thinking to myself, like, in Dark Souls, the game would have let me do this. Or in Dark Souls, the boss wouldn't have done this stupid thing. Or in Dark Souls, I'd have been able to just go past this and do this thing. And I think that's an example of a fantastic game where after playing Dark Souls, I can't play other games without just thinking and wishing I was playing Dark Souls. Because Dark Souls does these things better than pretty much every other game. It has better world design, level design, a story that's not in your face with loads of cutscenes. It's got freedom to the player. It's got bosses that are punishing but fair. And usually when I play other games, even if I turn the game up onto its highest difficulty, it just means that bosses will kill me in one hit and I have less health. It's not hard but fair in the same way Dark Souls is. And that's why I think Dark Souls is just the ultimate gaming experience. For me personally, anyway. I think it's the greatest video game ever created. And the sequels are not as good as this. Demon Souls was not as good as this. Bloodborne's not as good as this. Elden Ring is not as good as this. Because this game gets everything right in ways that the other games don't. The other games have like one fatal flaw. Like Dark Souls 3, it's too linear. And in Elden Ring, it's like they reuse bosses and the bosses don't have the same creativity as Dark Souls. There's a flaw in all of the games. Dark Souls doesn't have as many flaws as the other games do. It has flaws, because everything has flaws. Nothing is perfect. But Dark Souls is the closest to perfect I think any video game will ever be. So, that's the end of this video. If you enjoyed this incredibly long, epic video, which I don't think I'll ever do a video as long as this again, my voice is just dead. I've been speaking for 2.5 hours non-stop. So, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe share this video with anyone that might enjoy it if you feel it was good enough. Thank you again for watching. This is Soul Reborn, signing out. Have a good one.